Hey friends, before we dive into tonight's story, did you know that nearly 80% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed? If you're enjoying this kind of content, consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps a lot, and it keeps these long stories going. Also, I'd love to hear from you. What time is it right now where you are, and which city are you listening from tonight? And if these stories help you sleep, feel free to tap the thanks button to support the channel. It truly means a lot. All right, let's get into it. I slid into the driver's seat of my cruiser at precisely 0012. The dash clock glowed an icy green, October 14th, 2002. My breath fogged the windshield, and I cracked the heater vent to chase back the chill. I'm Officer Mark Sullivan, Badge 412, Maple Ridge Police Department. Population, 1,600 and change. The call had come in just minutes earlier. Disturbance at Red Lantern Diner, half-dressed male attacking vehicles. I'd heard worse on graveyard shift, but something about the word attacking in that deserted stretch of Highway 99 felt off. My hand hovered over the radio button as I pulled out, anticipation tightening around my ribs like a vice. I clicked. Sully 1 to dispatch, responding to Red Lantern, ETA 2 minutes. Static, then the faint hiss of the dispatcher. Nobody was around to back me up until at least 10. Streetlights flickered in and out through the mist. The road was slick from earlier drizzle, and as I eased past the last cluster of pines, I thought about home. Warm bed, engine off, lights down low. But duty called. The diner's neon sign buzzed ahead, red letters half burned out, casting a pulsing glow across the deserted lot. I killed the cruiser's engine, heart thundering louder than any motor. With my flashlight in one hand and taser in the other, I slipped out onto gravel. The air tasted of damp earth and stale grease. Somewhere, a loose gutter jangled in the wind. I pressed my shoulder against the doorframe to peer inside. Booths empty. Coffee cups wiped clean. The counter glinting under fluorescent tubes. No flicker of movement. Around the side, headlights revealed him. A man in ragged jeans, no shirt, pacing like a caged animal beside a battered Plymouth. His skin was pale under the lights, sweat beaded at his temples despite the chill. He jabbed at the car's hood, scraping metal with dirty nails, eyes rolling, wild, unfocused. I swallowed and called out, voice flat but firm. "Sir, Maple Ridge PD, step away from the vehicle." He froze mid-scratch, head whipping toward me. Pupils blown wide. That glassy sheen in his eyes made me think of a cornered animal. He spat something I couldn't hear, then grunted and resumed his assault on the car. Every instinct screamed to back off. I clicked my mic. Backup needed. Possible violent subject under influence. Stand by. The response crackled through my earpiece. Copy, Sully 1, ETA 10 minutes. I exhaled, frosting the collar of my jacket. In that moment, alone under that buzzing neon sign, adrenaline pumped so hard I swore I could taste it. I took a half step forward, aiming the flashlight at his chest to show my position. "Hey," I said, "step away. We're here to help." He turned fully, arms raised like he'd been challenged to a fight. He snarled, the words barely coherent. "They're coming." His voice trembled with panic and rage. I recognized the signs. This wasn't booze or meth. Years on night shift, I dealt once before with PCP-induced psychosis. The rigid posture, frantic movements, superhuman strength. My knuckles whitened around the handle of my flashlight. In training, they'd drilled into us. Verbal de-escalation first, offer help. So I steadied my voice. "All right, I need you to calm down. Sir, you're safe here. Help is coming." He paused, breathing so hard steam rose from his lips. Then he bolted, sprinting at me with an inhuman roar. My heart leaped. I fired the taser. 2 prongs sizzled through the air but missed by inches. He kept coming. I slammed into him, flashlight whirling like a baton. He brushed it aside, hands reaching for my holster. Panic flooded me. I spun, dropping to one knee, twisting my wrist so my retention holster locked tight. His fingers scraped leather, then metal. I snapped my legs out, tripping him over the car's threshold. He hit the pavement with a thunderous crack, gravel embedding in his skin. But he was up again in an instant, eyes blazing, rage renewed. The fight blurred. 1 second I was on my feet, the next flat on my back, his weight pinning me to cold stone. Every breath felt like shards of glass in my lungs. My radio lay forgotten on the hood, crackling. I lunged for it, but he swatted it away. Pain screamed in my shoulder where he'd kicked. My jacket split open, bruises already blossoming. Somewhere in the din, the diner's neon sign blinked, casting long shadows across our struggle. I fought to push him off, each shove sending agony through my bruised ribs. My world narrowed to his wild eyes and the iron taste of fear in my mouth. Just when I thought I'd be crushed, headlights carved through the fog. Back up. 2 cruisers screeched in beside us, doors flinging open. Officer Ramirez and 2 others tumbled out, voices shouting commands. The man snarled and swung a fist. 1 cop hucked a stun grenade. The flash and pop stunned us both. I seized the moment, hooking my arm under the suspects and rolling him away. Gravel bit into my palms, blood cactus pricking every knuckle. He howled as cuffs snapped onto his wrists. A paramedic unit pulled in behind, lights pulsating. I shoved myself up against the Plymouth, body shaking so hard I could barely stand. They lifted him with straps, tucking him into a gurney. His eyes locked onto mine, glowing with a feral intelligence. "They're watching," he rasped, voice thin as ice. Paramedics injected sedative. His limbs went slack. I watched until he was loaded into the ambulance, siren wailing off into the night. My legs gave out and I collapsed against the car, panting, ribs heaving. The neon sign flickered once more and died, plunging the lot into blackness. My mic crackled. "Sully 1 to dispatch. Suspect in custody, ready for transport." My voice trembled. "Copy," came the reply. "Good work." I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty lot. The diner's door stood silent, windows dark. Somewhere inside, the coffee machine hissed. Wherever it was, it sounded off, like something alive. I closed my eyes, picturing that man's gaze, wild and haunted. My radio lay dead on the asphalt. And far in the distance, beyond the reach of every flashlight, I heard a single voice crackle. "Please, don't leave me here." A whisper that wasn't in my ear, but beneath my skin. The ambulance doors slid shut behind the stretcher with a pneumatic hiss that echoed through the empty lot. I pressed my shoulder into the Plymouth's hood to hoist myself up, every muscle blazing with protest. The night air had turned colder, the mist gathering like a shroud around the scene. Ramirez climbed in beside the suspect, securing straps with clinical precision as the paramedic's radio crackled instructions. I could see the man's chest rising and falling in shallow mechanical breaths. His eyes were glazed, but still flickered with that manic fire when he caught my gaze. I averted my eyes, rubbing my temples, taste of blood and gravel still pungent in my mouth. The stretcher's wheels rattled over gravel as they pushed him into the ambulance bay. Lights pulsed red and white, slicing through the fog, painting the trunk of my cruiser in dizzying patterns. I slid into the passenger seat of Ramirez's car before he even turned the engine over. "You okay?" he asked softly, voice low. The question hung in the air heavy as a coffin lid. I nodded, running a hand through my hair, knuckles streaked with crimson where I dug into the pavement. By the time we arrived at the county hospital, siren slashing through deserted streets, my heart had slowed to a ragged stutter. Under the harsh fluorescence of the emergency entrance, voices rallied around us. Nurses in scrubs, orderlies with wheeled carts, the endless hum of machines. Ramirez stayed at my side until they guided the suspect inside. I watched through the glass doors as they stripped him of restraints, attached IV lines, and ordered a barrage of blood tests. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. Back at the station, the clock on the wall read 2:47. I unhitched my holster, loosening the belt that felt tighter now than any handcuff. My uniform was streaked with mud and smeared with blood. In the locker room's grimy mirror, I saw a stranger's face, eyes shadowed, jaw clenched, cheeks hollow. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Just do your report." But my hands trembled. I took my report folder into the briefing room, a cinder block bunker lit by flickering tubes. Lieutenant Watkins leaned against the podium, arms folded. "You and Ramirez handled this," he said without preamble. "Good work, but we need a full statement. Timeline, witness logs, forensic photography. I want it by noon." He paused, studying me with hooded eyes. "And Sully, take the rest of the shift off. Go home, get checked out." Home. That word felt like a lie. I stared at the exit door, every locker and bulletin board blurring into a smear of beige and gray. Instead of punching out, I walked to the evidence room. Ledgers, photos, the suspect's blood-spattered jeans locked in a plastic bag. I flipped through the snapshots. The jagged scrape on the Plymouth's hood, the deep gouges where he'd sunk fingernails into metal, the wide-angle shot of 3 cruisers forming a triangle around him like phalanx. My boots felt anchored to the linoleum. Late paperwork is a silent killer of thought. I composed my initial statement, my cursive looser than usual, words stumbling across the page. Subject exhibited extreme agitation, possible substance-induced psychosis, physical engagement necessary to prevent injury or weapon seizure. Backup delay contributed to escalation. I wrote extreme agitation 3 times before settling. Each repetition felt like scratching at a wound. After 7 pages, I closed the binder, rub of pen dragging across the final line like a tombstone. Headlights flashed outside. Ramirez knocked and entered quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "They're from Mrs. Lane," he said, nodding to the evidence room window. "She insisted." I took the cup with a grunt of thanks, the heat seeping into my fingers. The coffee tasted bitter, burnt grounds clinging to my tongue, but a welcome jolt. We sat shoulder to shoulder, the hum of station fans ticking overhead. "You know," Ramirez began, voice low, "when that guy first lurched at you, I thought you were done for." He swallowed. "I've never seen anything like that. I've seen fights, domestic calls, high-speed chases, but that..." He shook his head, eyes distant. He wanted that gun so bad. I stared at the mug, steam drifting past my face. "I thought I'd lose it," I admitted. The words tasted like defeat. "If he had..." "Don't finish that sentence," Ramirez said gently. "You did what you had to do." His reassurance landed like a lifeline in frigid water. Still, I felt dislodged from myself, a cog rattling loose in some unseen machine. Eventually, I trudged out into the pre-dawn chill. The station lot was silent. My cruiser sat alone, headlights dim, doors parked open. I climbed in and sat for a long time, hands on the wheel, coffee cooling in the cup holder. Dawn was fingering the sky with pale light, birds shrilling, welcome to a world that seemed indifferent to last night's violence. I thought of Mrs. Lane's diner, her silent watch over the lot. The coffee machines hiss like a living thing. Something in that place didn't add up. With trembling fingers, I dialed dispatch to ask about the suspect's lab results. Subject's blood work is inconclusive. No PCP, no narcotics detected, the dispatcher read from the report. Inconclusive. No answer to explain his behavior. I exhaled sharply, fogging the glass. Any history on Tom Harris? I asked. Dispatch paused. Harris? Last name first. Thomas Harris, drifter. Local run-ins for trespassing, vagrancy, no psych history. That's it, I said. Thanks. The line went dead. I sat in silence, the seatbelt cutting into my chest, as if anchoring me in place. By 6:15 I was home, an apartment above the hardware store, cheap rent, cheaper heat. I flicked on the lights, undressed, and let my uniform drop in a sodden heap. The shower stung where cuts had crusted overnight. I scrubbed until the water ran clear, but the images remained. His wild eyes, the sting of his fists, the buzz of neon that smelled like death. Toweling off, I checked the door, locked twice, and still felt exposed. I brewed a cup of coffee on my own machine. No hiss, no metallic tang. I cradled the mug, traced the maple leaf emblem pressed into the ceramic. Outside, the sky shredded from black to bruised purple. Papers lay scattered on the table. My report binder, photos of the scene, a statement draft. I picked up a photo of the diner's interior. A single booth under a flickering light, jelly jars on the counter, that old machine in the corner. It gleamed, innocuous, but I remembered the hiss, the taste in the air. My phone buzzed. Message from dispatch. Need you for follow-up interview at 10 o'clock. Lieutenant Watkins, I texted back, on my way. But I didn't feel ready. I didn't know if I ever would be. My reflection in the blackened window stared back, hollow-eyed. The grunt of a log settling in the apartment below. The coffee was lukewarm now. I set it aside. I thought of the suspect strapped in the hospital bed. Sedative drip in his arm. Eyes rolling beneath closed lids. I thought of that final whisper I heard at the diner. Please, don't leave me here. It wasn't his voice, not exactly. It was something else, emerging from static at the edge of hearing. I sipped my coffee, every nerve alive with that impossible whisper. The wind picked up, rattling the window frame. I rose and pressed my palm flat against the glass, fingertips chilled. In the distance, the din of early traffic on Highway 99. A world waking, oblivious. And somewhere out there, the Red Lantern Diner's neon sign flickered back to life, pulsing like a warning. The fluorescent glare of the county hospital's psychiatric ward corridor felt as sterile and unwelcoming as a morgue. At precisely 10 a.m., Lieutenant Watkins ushered me through double doors padded with plexiglass. My uniform was freshly pressed but felt stiff, like an ill-fitting shell around my shoulders. The lieutenant paused at a windowed observation room. Behind the glass, Tom Harris lay strapped to a narrow bed, eyelids flickering behind half-open eyes. Tubes traced from his arm to a drip stand, and a pulse oximeter glowed on his fingertip. Psych consult says he's stable enough for an interview, Watkins said, voice low. But you need to be prepared. He's unpredictable. I swallowed. The adrenaline that had pulsed through me all night was ebbing, leaving a hollow ache. Got it, I replied. The lieutenant nodded, then slipped away, leaving me alone in the bleak hallway. I tapped the observation room door's intercom. Officer Sullivan, PD, requesting entry. A soft buzz. The door slid open. I stepped inside, the air smelling faintly of antiseptic and desperation. Harris's bed faced a mirrored wall. I could see my reflection beside him, dark circles under my eyes, shoulders slumped. I cleared my throat. Mr. Harris? Thomas? My voice sounded distant. He propped himself on one elbow, gray eyes tracking me. Why are you here? He rasped. His voice was thin, labored. I'm sorry. Tom, I said quietly, pulling a folding chair toward the foot of his bed. I need to know what happened. You were found attacking vehicles at the diner. Care to tell me why? I kept my tone measured. In training, they said calm questions can de-escalate even the most agitated. He blinked slowly, as though waking from a dream. They came for me, he whispered. They brought me back. My skin prickled. Who's they? He shook his head, breathing ragged. The ones who remember me. His hand twitched, fingers brushing at the sheet as if warding off an insect. I leaned forward. Tom, you're safe here. Help is coming. His gaze flicked to the drip bag and back to me. Help. The word trembled from his lips like a curse. I flipped open my notebook. When did you last remember being safe? He closed his eyes, brow furrowing. Before the coffee. My stomach sank. Coffee? His eyes flew open, pupils contracting, that familiar haunted sheen returning. Red Lantern coffee. It's changed. His voice rose, pitched with panic. You don't know. You don't. He thrust himself upright, straps cutting into his wrists. A nurse's voice crackled through the intercom. Officer, he's agitated. I'm going to sedate. I held up a hand. Wait. I needed more than sedatives. Tell me what you remember. The lights overhead hummed. A silence thick enough to strangle. Then Harris leaned back, head lolled, breathing slowing. The sedative's tug was already winning. It's wrong, he murmured. Feels alive. His eyes closed. I watched until his breathing steadied, then rose and left the room, heart drumming an uneasy rhythm. Outside, Watkins waited. How'd it go? I rubbed my temple. He thinks the coffee's different, like it's alive or something. The lieutenant's lips pressed into a line. His blood work was clean, but his organs might still react to contaminants. Heavy metals? Pesticides. We'll send samples. He turned and walked down the hall. I trailed behind, mind spinning, alive. The diner's machine, the hiss. That final whisper. Please, don't leave me here. By noon, I'd met the forensic team in the evidence room. Inside, beneath a harsh bulb, sat the suspicious coffee machine's water reservoir, drained and bagged, and 2 vials taken from my blood, odd particles floating like dust motes. Dr. Haley, the county toxicologist, peered through a microscope. Preliminary results show elevated levels of thallium and traces of an unknown alkaloid. Her eyes lifted. Thallium poisoning can cause delirium, hallucinations. That alkaloid, we've never seen it. I've sent it to the state lab. I swallowed. You mean someone intentionally laced the coffee? Dr. Haley shrugged. So far, these chemicals point to foul play. We need to trace the source. I left with a plastic sample container of ground coffee. Evidence tag 412-A. In my cruiser, I set the cup holder's coffee aside. The engine hummed as I punched in the diner's address. The GPS said 15 minutes. I drove past farmland waking under cold sun, tractors idle in frost-tipped fields. Maple Ridge was stirring. Kids in yellow jackets waited at bus stops. Neighbors walked dogs. None knew that at their edge, beneath neon flicker and diner charm, danger had seeped into every drip. Red Lantern signs still blinked when I arrived. On, written backwards in hot pink. The parking lot was empty. Through the grimy windows, booths gleamed vacant. Rusted clocks above the counter showed 11:03, frozen. I drew my taser and flashlight and slipped inside, careful not to disturb evidence markers by the door. The air inside tasted stale and chemically sour. I swept my light across vinyl benches and formica tables. No crumbs, no coffee cups. But the coffee machine sat on its stainless rack, tubes and wires coiled like veins. Its drip tray glistened with dark residue. I photographed every angle, labeling each shot. Drip tray, brew switch, water inlet. Then I crouched to sniff. No metallic tang, just stale bean scent. I lifted the lid to the brew basket. Clean, empty. Beneath, a paper filter holder bore no stain. It was as if someone had scrubbed it. My breath caught. I backed away, a soft whir, the machine powering on. My flashlight beam wavered. No outlet was live. I spun to find the nearest exit, heart piston thudding. The sound grew, a mechanical hiss like steam hammering through pipes. I slammed into the counter, taser raised. The machine's brew light pulsed erratically, alone in the darkness. I pressed the button, then killed the switch. The hiss stopped. My radio crackled. "Sully 1, you there?" It was dispatch. "You okay?" I cleared my throat. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a routine follow-up." My voice trembled. I gathered my evidence bag and fled the diner, lights cutting a tunnel through the fog-laced lot. At the cruiser, I wiped sweat from my collar. The machine's hiss echoed in my skull. Back at headquarters, I spilled the ground coffee sample onto a sterilized tray. Dr. Haley's notes detailed thallium's acute toxicity. Symptoms could mimic psychosis. But the unknown alkaloid, no one had data. Whoever had mixed this cocktail knew what they were doing, and only one place provided coffee here. Red Lantern. I traced the machine's maintenance records. Bought new in 1998. Serviced 6 months ago by J&R Appliance Repair. I called their number. A jittery voice answered. "J&R, may I help you?" My mind blanked. "I'm Officer Sullivan. We're investigating contamination at the Red Lantern Diner. Your company serviced the coffee machine 6 months back. Who was the tech?" The line went silent. Then, I don't recall names. "We rotate staff, but nothing unusual. Just routine cleaning," I pressed. "Any signs of tampering? Replacement parts?" Long pause. "Number we replaced a gasket, standard part." I hung up, number in my call log, routine, standard. Everything so impeccably normal. By late afternoon, I'd compiled a spreadsheet of possible suspects. Diner employees, maintenance techs, local chemists, but nothing jumped out. Meanwhile, my own symptoms flared. Tremor in my left hand, dull ache behind my eyes. I snapped off a quick scene photograph, hoping I wasn't overreacting. But I knew better. Thallium poisoning can build slowly. My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Lane, the diner's cook. "Officer Sullivan, just checking in. I heard you were asking about the machine. Let me know if I can help." I stared at her words. Should I respond? Every instinct screamed caution. Instead, I tucked the phone in my pocket and drove home, crossing the old iron bridge where water ran black beneath. The road was deserted. Every curve and tree line felt alive with watchful eyes. At home, I called my wife, Emily. Her cheery voice broke through my tension. I lied about paperwork, said I'd be late. She teased me about coffee date at dawn. I forced a laugh. "Sure, sweetheart," I said. "Coffee at 6. I cradled the phone as if it were a lifeline. After I hung up, I sank to the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, knees drawn up. The coffee sample sat on the counter. I stared at it, uncertainty clawing at my gut. The house was unnaturally quiet. No hum of refrigerator, no creak of settling beams. I flicked on every light, flashing through rooms like a candle in wind. I found my service pistol in the locked cabinet and hefted it. Metal was reassurance. Cold, unyielding, bound by laws and lock mechanisms. It wasn't the invisible threat in that drip tray. I went to bed only when exhaustion eclipsed nerve. My dreams were kaleidoscopic. A storm of fluorescent bulbs, a phantom coffee machine brewing black liquid that turned to blood. I ran across a desert highway toward a neon sign screaming, "Help!" But the sign shattered, and the pieces stabbed my feet. I woke choking, sweat-soaked sheets clinging to my skin. The clock read 3:13, far too early. I lay rigid, heart pounding, as distant thunder rolled. Rain began to patter against the window pane in irregular rhythms. By 6 a.m., I was at the dining table with my cup of coffee, bitter enough to sting my throat. Emily slumped beside me, eyes half closed. "Rough night?" she murmured. I forced a smile. "Just the usual." She didn't buy it, but she didn't press. I sipped, each swallow a pact. I would keep going, keep searching for answers. If someone had messed with that machine, they would need to be stopped, before more people ended up like Tom Harris, half mad in a hospital bed. I loaded my cruiser with evidence bags, notebooks, a half-empty thermos of coffee. In my vest pocket, a small bottle of atropine, standard issue for chemical exposure. I drove to the address listed for J&R Appliance Repair. A nondescript trailer on Maple Avenue, peeling paint and a fading sign. No cars in the lot. I knocked on the door, no answer. I tried the handle, locked. A single light flickered behind a curtained window. I circled the building, searching for another entrance. At the back, a garage door stood slightly ajar, its hinges groaning. I slipped inside, flashlight beam cutting arcs across scattered toolboxes, industrial solvents, a lone folding chair. The air smelled of motor oil and dust. I cleared my throat. "Hello?" No reply. I edged further, taser in hand, eyes on shadows. At the far end, a desk lamp illuminated a notebook, open to a page of chemical formulas, thallium compounds, scribbled notes about psychoactive alkaloids. My pulse surged. Whoever had serviced that machine didn't operate alone. He'd been experimenting, weaponizing coffee. A soft click behind me. I spun. A figure stepped into the light, coat stained with rust-colored smudges, his face half masked by shadow. I drew my pistol. "Don't move." He raised his hands, palms open. "Officer Sullivan," he said calmly. Voice ringed with controlled panic. "You shouldn't have come here." The hairs on my neck prickled. I steadied the pistol on his chest. "Who are you?" He paused, gaze flickering to the notebook. "Call me. I'm just a technician, but they'll come for you next." My finger tightened on the trigger. The garage door rattled, as though thunder inside. He took a slow breath. "Do you want a cup of coffee?" My heart pounded. Everything else fell away. The thrum of blood in my ears, the hissing machines outside, the distant pulse of neon. I didn't answer. He stepped back into shadow. The notebook's pages fluttered, torn by a breeze I couldn't feel. The formulas blurred into smear, unreadable. I holstered my gun, too many questions chasing each other through my mind. "Stay," I said through the dim, hands where I can see them. He didn't move. The thunderous rat-tat-tat of heavy boots on gravel sounded outside. A squad of cruisers pulled in, Ramirez, Watkins, and an evidence team, faces set with grim purpose. I exhaled, pulse uneven. The technician raised his chin as if in invitation or defiance. It was impossible to tell which. Lightning flickered through a high window, illuminating dripping pesticide sprayers mounted on the walls. The machines for mixing fancy coffee now looked like alchemical tools of a madman. The rain lashed the door, thunder booming like a gavel. And in that charged silence, I realized that once you step off the beaten path, once you draw breath near the edge of knowing, there is no turning back. The world shifts under your feet, coffee machines hiss, shadows breathe, and ordinary nights become death traps. I swallowed, mind racing. Who was the true predator? Tom Harris, delirious over hot drip brew, or the person standing in the dark waiting to finish what they started? I holstered my pistol as Lieutenant Watkins and Officer Ramirez closed the distance on the technician, their cuffs snapping tight around his wrists before he could protest. His face was pale beneath the flickering garage lamp, eyes darting like trapped rats. I stayed back a step, heart pounding, flashlight beam dancing across his shoulders where rust-colored smudges stained his coat. The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof in uneven drips, echoing around us like a restless heartbeat. Watkins read him his rights with clipped precision while Ramirez rifled the desk, securing the notebook of chemical formulas and a half-empty container of commercial coffee grounds. The technician's voice cracked as he whispered, "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to end like this." His words drifted into the static of our radios, drowned beneath the thunderous downpour. I scanned the toolboxes lining the walls. Sprayers, solvent cans, a solitary gas mask hanging like a grim sentinel. Every surface was coated in a film of motor oil and dust. In the corner, an old stereo crackled to life before dying in a gasp of static. The world felt unmoored, edges softened by the haze of adrenaline. Ramirez hustled the technician into the back of a cruiser. The suspect slumped against tempered glass with a look of defeated bewilderment. Watkins turned to me, voice low. "Get that machine secured. We need to send it to Crime Lab for analysis. I'll call for hazmat." I nodded and crossed back to the coffee machine, its polished chrome surface dull in the gloom. The drip tray still glistened with residue I dared not touch without gloves. I lifted the cover at the top. Slick tubes and coils glinted like veins. I snapped photographs, labeling each 412-M1, careful not to disturb the evidence markers already placed by the techs. Lightning glinted through the high window, illuminating the machine's front panel. Brew switch, power light, water gauge. I tested the brew switch again. It clicked, but no hiss followed. The wiring looked intact. Whoever had wired it to deliver thallium or that unknown alkaloid had done it inside the reservoir or water line, not in the control panel. I slipped on nitrile gloves and pried open the reservoir cap. Water pooled inside, its surface oily and tinted a dull gray. I collected a sample into a sterile vial and tagged it 412-W1, then wiped the exterior with a swab, bagging the swab strip as 412-S1. Outside, sirens faded into the night. The rain had slowed to a spatter, but the mist clung low across the lot, curling around my boots. I paused at the garage door, leaving the machine under yellow crime scene tape. Under my breath, I muttered, "One machine. But how many more?" I thought of every diner and cafe in this county, and beyond, with the same model I'd seen here. A network of machines, each quietly dispensing tainted coffee to unwitting victims. The realization hit me like a freight train. Ramirez flagged down a hazmat truck as I climbed into my cruiser. The tech was already handcuffed in the back, eyes hollow. I slid behind the wheel and radioed dispatch. Sully 1, Station 2. Hazmat on scene. Suspect in custody. Sending evidence back to lab. Over. Static crackled. A calm voice replied, "Copy that, Sully 1. Good work. Be advised, lab will expedite tests. Keep me posted." I killed the engine and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to my pulse, tasting copper on my tongue. The drive back to headquarters was a blur of wet pavement and yellow streetlights, my mind looping over every detail. The technician's eerie calm, his warnings, the notebook's formulas. I pulled into the evidence garage, joined by Watkins. We watched hazmat suit-clad technicians seal the machine in a containment crate. Watkins exhaled, shoulders sagging. "We'll know soon enough," he said. "If this was deliberate, there's a hell of a case here." I nodded, but my gut twisted. "I can't shake the coffee taste," I admitted. "Feels like it's still in my mouth." I spent the next morning in a soundproofed interview room, questioning the technician under bright LED panels. His story was disjointed. He'd been contracted by an outside party to install an additive system, paid well, too well, to retrofit machines across town. He named no names, spoke only of they, those who wanted control, disciplined the lazy, delivered judgment by poison. His gaze was intense, cynical, as if he sat behind a curtain watching me react. Every denial and evasion only deepened my suspicion. This was bigger than Maple Ridge. By afternoon, I returned to Mrs. Lane's diner, determined to find anything she'd overlooked. She met me at the door in her flower-speckled apron, hands pressed against the counter like she braced for impact. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but wary. "Detective Sullivan," she said quietly. "Coffee?" She gestured to a fresh pot. I hesitated, hand hovering over my taser strapped at my hip. "Milk and sugar," I replied, voice clipped. She poured, careful hands shaking slightly. The steam rose in soft whirls and the smell was familiar, not metallic, but rich, sweet, almost comforting. I lifted the mug with gloved hand and inhaled. No chemical undercurrent, just warm roast. I took a cautious sip. It was exactly like any diner coffee I'd ever tasted, uncomplicated. My shoulders sagged. "It tastes fine," I murmured. Mrs. Lane watched me, expression unreadable. "We got a new supplier a month ago," she said. "Local roaster. You can meet them if it helps." I nodded, setting the mug down. "Thank you." Back in the cruiser with that sample, I realized how eager I was to believe the contamination ended at the machine in the garage. But science doesn't bend to wishful thinking. I drove the last sample to the lab myself, heartbeat keyed to the drip of each raindrop off the roof. The chemist greeted me with a nod, took the grounds, and closed the door. That evening, alone at home, I tried to sleep but found myself staring at the ceiling. The notebook's formulas spilled behind my eyelids, thallium sulfate, atropine antagonists, an unidentified alkaloid-coated X17. I rolled onto my side, blanket tangled around my legs. The clock read 1:37 a.m. I forced myself up, brewed a cup of coffee in my kitchen, my own, untainted machine, then brought it back to bed, wrapping the mug in my hands. The warmth soothed me, but every sip reminded me how close I'd come. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, an email from the state lab. My eyes stung as I flipped on the lamp. Lab reference number S412, alkaloid X17 identified as derivative of ergotamine, potent neurotoxin. Combined with thallium, produces progressive psychosis and motor hyperactivity. LD50 threshold approximated at 0.02 milligrams per kilogram. Detected in hair follicles of 2 additional individuals from Ridgeview Diner. My breath caught. Ergotamine, a fungus that grows on rye bread, historically linked to mass poisonings and hallucinations. 2 more victims. Ridgeview Diner, sister to Red Lantern in design, same model coffee machines. The network was real. The poisoners had reached further than I feared. In that moment I realized the scale of what we faced. Not a lone madman, but a calculated operation. Targeted, methodical, terrifying. I sank to my knees, coffee splashing onto the carpet. The mug shattered, ceramic fragments and dark liquid pooling beneath me. My head throbbed, vision swimming. The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was the echo of that hissing machine, the drip of contaminated coffee tracing a path through my life. They found me in the morning, cold, delirious, eyes fluttering beneath shut lids. My wife called 911. They arrived with paramedics who reversed the poisoning with atropine and chelation therapy. In the hospital, I kept drifting in and out, a haze of alarms and fluorescent strips overhead. Watkins and Ramirez visited, grave-eyed behind plexiglass. The technician was in custody, awaiting trial, but his masterminds remained ghosts in the system. When I finally sat up in bed, tubes in my arms and monitors beeping at my fingertips, I realized how fragile reality could be. Ordinary coffee could kill. Machines humming in lonely diners could become instruments of horror. And the people behind it, the ones who met in secret to calibrate dosages and engineer psychosis, walk free, hidden in plain sight. I stared out the window at the hospital's neon cross bleeding into the dark sky. The electric hum reminded me of the diner's sign, and of that final whisper, "They're watching." My reflection looked back at me, hollow-eyed. Was I still under the influence? Or had I woken from a nightmare that would never truly end? The nurse adjusted my IV and asked if I wanted water or more coffee. I met her gaze. "Black," I said softly, leaning forward. My voice was raspy but steady. She hesitated, then nodded and left. As I waited, every drip of the saline bag echoed like a time bomb ticking in my veins. My phone lay on the bedside table, untouched messages from Ridgeview, from dispatch, from friends asking how I was. I reached for it, thumb hovering over the new voicemail. And somewhere beyond the glass and steel, coffee machines clicked on and off in empty diners, dispensing hope and terror in equal measure. The question hung in the sterile air like a challenge. If the poison could hide in the simplest cup of coffee, who could you trust with your next sip? I woke to the sound of monitors beeping in rhythm with my pulse, sunlight slanting through the blinds in uneven bands. My throat was raw, voice gone hoarse from weeks of coughing up the poison's wake. I lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of hospital life beyond my door. Footsteps in the hallway, distant fragments of conversation, the clink of metal trolleys. My fourth line tethered me to this sterile bed, but every inch of my skin felt electric, as if memories of that first night had etched themselves into my nervous system. When the nurse came in at shift change, I asked for black coffee. She hesitated, then nodded and left. I closed my eyes against the memory of that hissing machine. Hours later, she returned with a disposable cup from the hospital cafeteria. I cradled it between trembling hands, inhaling the familiar aroma, a halo of warmth in my palms. Only when I was certain it was safe did I sip. Bitter, dull, perfectly ordinary. Lieutenant Watkins visited that morning, his face stubble rough and eyes heavy. He pulled up a chair. "We got a few more leads," he said quietly. The state lab traced the alkaloid's precursor to a research facility in Seattle. Someone ordered small batches of ergotamine compounds under an alias. He slid a printout across the bedside table. Shipping logs, partial addresses, code names. I squinted, trying to make sense. They used the same alias to book 3 rooms at Motel 6 in Grants Pass, Medford, and here in Maple Ridge, all within 2 weeks of the first poisoning. He tapped the paper. They were setting up a network. My stomach turned. The scale was worse than I'd feared. "You think there are more machines out there?" I asked. He exhaled. Every diner, every cafe, anywhere that chain model was common, someone could be waiting. he stood. "Once you're cleared, I want you back on cases. But maybe something with less hospitality." His thin joke landed awkwardly. I forced a nod. When he left, I stared at the cup until it had gone cold. I checked out that afternoon, pale as a ghost, but determined. Emily met me at the entrance, worry etched on her face. I hugged her, arms heavy, breathing in her scent. "I'm okay," I whispered, but in my mind I replayed the moment I collapsed. The whir of the machine, my vision tunneling, that final drip echoing in my ears. Back home, our kitchen felt like a safe haven. I locked the door, drew the blinds, and brewed coffee on my own machine. No chance I'd risk a single cup anywhere else. As I poured, my phone buzzed. An anonymous tip forwarded by dispatch. "Check Victor's Cafe on Highway 199. Same machine model." I looked up at Emily. She tracked my gaze, eyes wide. "I'm going," I said. "I have to." The drive south was restless. Wipers swiping rain into smeared arcs. My knuckles white on the wheel. Victor's Cafe sat at a lonely intersection, white clappered walls and string lights unlit. I parked under the awning and approached on foot. Badge clipped to my belt, taser and gloves ready. Inside, the bell above the door jingled. The place was empty, but for a lone barista mopping floors, young, dark-haired, startled by my arrival. "Officer Sullivan, Maple Ridge, PD," I said quickly. "I need to inspect your coffee machine." He hesitated, face going pale. Sure, it's right here." He led me to the back counter. The same model, chrome and steel, sterile yet ominous. He fumbled with the buttons. "We just got it 6 months ago. New supplier, Townsend Roasters in Seattle." I nodded, observed, no signs of tampering. Reservoir cap threaded tightly, filter basket empty. I swabbed the reservoir, bagged the sample. Then I noticed a small engraved plate at the machine's base. Service by J&R Appliance Repair, May 3rd, 2025. My blood ran cold. I turned to the barista. "Who serviced this?" He swallowed. No idea. Our manager called them." I pulled out my phone. "What's your manager's name?" He shook his head. "She left last week, took a job in Medford." I thanked him, tucking my notes away, and slipping back into the rain. By dusk, I was back at the station, drenched and wired on adrenaline. I paced the briefing room as Watkins and Ramirez mapped out our next move. "That cafe ties into Seattle shipping, Grants Pass bookings, now here," Watkins said. He tapped the map. "They're building a chain, modular poisoning. If we can identify the funding, we can trace the masterminds." He looked at me. "You up for a stakeout?" I pressed my lips tight. "I don't know if I can." "Without coffee," Ramirez grinned. We got thermoses. The three of us piled into an unmarked car and headed back to Grants Pass. Night had fallen, rain smearing streetlights into orange halos. We parked across from the Grants Pass Inn, the third motel on the aliases list. The neon sign flickered in the mist. Vacancy. Below, it sat a small cafe, windows taped, sign reading Innergrin Coffees. A single light glowed inside. We waited in silence for hours. My senses sharpened. Every footstep, car door click, drip of water from the eaves. Ramirez sipped from a thermos. I stared at the cafe's door, willing it to open. Nothing. Just the rain, the hum of distant traffic, the tick of the clock above the cafe entrance. At 2:13 a.m., a shadow moved inside. A man in a dark parka emerged, coffee cup in hand. He glanced around before slipping behind the building. I whispered, "There, on foot." We slid out, following at a distance. He darted along an alley, paused at a green door with peeling paint. He knocked once, twice. The door swung open and he slipped inside. Ramirez signaled. We advanced. Inside was a small storage room. Crates of coffee beans stamped Townsend Roasters, empty packaging for ergotamine reagent kits, and a hacked coffee machine on a workbench, tubes rerouted to a hidden reservoir. A single bulb dangled overhead, painting the scene in stark light. Papers scrawled with financial ledgers pinned to a corkboard, wire transfers, shell corporations, coded notations, links to an offshore account in Belize. I raised my badge. Hands where I can see them. The man froze, then turned, eyes familiar. It was the same technician we'd arrested, the coat still smudged with rust. He dropped a folder. That's them, he said hoarsely. The network. They have names, they have power. He took a shaky breath. You think it stops at coffee? They're betting on chaos. Psychosis is just the beginning. Before I could cuff him again, a sudden crack of thunder rattled the window. He pointed. They're inside. My heart seized as footsteps echoed. A second figure stepping through a back door, face obscured by a hood. I leveled my taser. Ramirez moved to flank, but the hooded person raised a hand and a voice rang out, metallic and calm. Officer Sullivan, you've done well chasing our distractions, but justice is served by the big picture. I hesitated, mind racing. The figure stepped into the light, features obscured, only a faint glint of a ring on one finger. They held a coffee cup. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice continued, enjoy your coffee. The cup's brim dripped dark fluid. You never think to test the last drop. My stomach lurched. I fired the taser, the prongs embedding in the figure's shoulder, but they barely flinched. Ramirez kicked at their chest. The figure staggered but stayed upright. They raised the cup, tilted their head, and swallowed in one smooth motion. Then the world blurred. Ramirez's shout, the whine of the taser dying, pain blooming across my skull. I covered my eyes as the figure backed away. My vision darkened to edges. When I opened my eyes, I was slumped against the workbench, Ramirez beside me, bruised but alive. The hooded person was gone. The makeshift lab lay half destroyed, spilled beans, cap removed from reagent kit, wires dangling. The technician lay prone, blood pooling beneath him. The folder lay open, pages of names, local officials, business owners, even a few police officers. Each name coded with a machine's serial number. Ridgeview Cafe, Victor's, Red Lantern, Inner Grind, and a final line. Dorchester County, upcoming rollout. I bolted upright, adrenaline ravaging my limbs. There in Dorchester, that's on the East Coast. Ramirez nodded, scanning the folder in disbelief. The plan was bigger than all of Oregon, a coast-to-coast network. We have to alert the feds, he said. I grabbed my radio. Sully 1 to dispatch. Request immediate federal assistance. I have evidence of interstate chemical weapons distribution. Outside, rain pelted the alley in sheets. Sirens howled closer, but the world felt out of joint. I dropped to my knees and thumbed the hooded figure's discarded cup. It was empty, but for a smear of dark residue. I lifted it to my nose. No metallic tang, just acrid bitterness. My mind reeled. They'd drunk it themselves to prove loyalty or innocence. Either way, they weren't afraid. Whoever orchestrated this had resources, reach, and the willingness to drink poison last. We secured the scene, packing evidence, tending to the technician. By dawn, federal agents swarmed the motel and cafe, helicopters circling overhead, tracer teams in hazmat gear. I answered questions in the rain, my uniform plastered to my skin. Emily arrived, drenched and huddled under an umbrella, fear and relief warring in her eyes. I embraced her, closing my own panic behind a mask of professionalism. The investigation snowballed. Indictments, raids, court filings. News headlines screamed, "Coffee terror plot foiled," and "Cops versus caffeine conspiracy." I testified in D.C., my words echoing in grandiose chambers. But behind the scenes I felt hollow. The network's top architects remained shadows. Shell entities, untraceable trusts, lawyers in offshore havens. They were always one step ahead. Months later, I returned to Maple Ridge on vacation leave. The Red Lantern Diner was open again, neon humming softly, coffee cups stacked neatly. I sat at the counter, ordered a black drip, and watched Mrs. Lane pour. Her eyes met mine, knowing and guarded. She placed the cup before me. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of roasted beans. I wrapped my hands around it, heart pounding. With every instinct screaming, I set it down untouched. Instead, I pulled a flask from my jacket and poured a small amount of my own brew into the hospital-issued sample bag, just enough to test. I slid the cup back. "On the house," she said quietly. "Welcome back, Officer Sullivan." Her smile wasn't warm, it was wary. I nodded and left, empty-handed, heart hammering. Outside, neon touched the pavement in ruby pools. As I slid into my car, the sky fractured with distant thunder. I reached for my phone. One missed call from an unrecognized number, no voicemail. I ignored it. I looked at the unopened coffee cup in the trash bin next to my door. In the cup's bottom lay a single line etched into the foam's residue. "Enjoy your next cup." I froze. The world tilted. Questions cascaded. How many cups had I drunk untouched? Who else had sipped poison believing it safe? And as the diner's neon sign pulsed behind me, I realized that in this war of hisses and brews, there was no safe haven. Only one question remained. When your morning coffee tastes perfectly ordinary, will you dare to trust it? I flipped the first page of my notebook and cleared my throat into the dash-mounted recorder. Detective Laura Hayes, July 6th, 2018, 00:45 hours. My boots scuffed against the asphalt in the parking lot of the Maplewood precinct as I settled into the driver's seat. The night shift, what we call the graveyard shift, had always felt like a different world. Street lamps cast brittle pools of yellow light, and every shuddering tree limb sounded like footsteps. I'd been on the force for 13 years, but nothing could ever dull that first surge of tension when the sun finally sets and the real work begins. I thumbed the collar of my uniform shirt, the thin fabric already damp with sweat. Ohio summers were humid nightmares. The air clung to your skin like a wet blanket. I'd grabbed my coffee from the precinct's break room 5 minutes ago, but it was already lukewarm. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered softly as I idly traced the condensation on the styrofoam cup. I felt the buzz in my shoulders, the leftover adrenaline from a routine property damage call an hour earlier. I never truly unwind until dawn breaks and the shift ends. My partner, Officer Marcus Reed, was still at the station completing paperwork. He'd asked if I needed backup tonight, standard protocol, but I assured him I had it under control. Backup never came fast enough when it counts anyway. Solo patrol was part of the job. When you're the first one on scene, you only have yourself to rely on. At 0052, the radio crackled. All units, domestic disturbance in progress. Possible shots fired. Location 130 Crestwood Drive. Respond. Code 3. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. 10-4, I replied, switching on the siren. The black and white leapt forward, its red and blue lights dancing off the low-hanging eaves of suburban homes. The engine's roar was my forward heartbeat, as I accelerated down Elm Street, the tires whining against the asphalt. Crestwood Drive was a narrow cul-de-sac lined with maple and oak trees, their branches arching overhead like gnarled sentinels. At the center stood a two-story ranch house, number 130, its vinyl siding streaked with rain from last night's storm. A single balcony jutted out above the garage, white railings now glinting under my spotlight. The entire street felt frozen in that moment. A deer statue in a front yard, but one glance at the swirling blue light told me it was anything but peaceful. I throttled the engine to a stop 10 feet from the curb, killed the siren, and grabbed my flashlight and radio mic. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a scattering of gravel on the lawn, tiny stones stained pink. I crouched low, edged toward the house, and called out, "Maplewood PD." "Detective Hayes." Silence answered me, thick like cotton. Then came the telltale sound, the clack of shoes on wood above, quick and panicked, like someone trying not to be heard. My heart pounded. Standard approach would be to wait for uniformed units, but the dispatcher's tone meant there was already chaos inside. I edged up the front steps, my flashlight trained on the balcony railing. The sliding glass door was cracked open, shards of glass slivered at our feet. I took a breath, pushed it the rest of the way, and vaulted onto the balcony in one smooth motion. Inside the living room, frozen in the blue glow, stood a teenage girl pressed against the wall, her eyes wide, tears streaking down her face. A man in his early 60s, white hair brushed back, held a revolver in a shaking hand. His knuckles were white, his chest heaved with every exhale. "Sir," I said, voice steady but clipped, "drop it. Now." He didn't move. His gaze flicked to the floor, then down, where something I hadn't seen yet lay sprawled. My stomach knotted. The girl, no older than 18, dressed in pajama pants and a tank top, scrambled forward. "Dad, please," she cried. "Jason, please, please stop." The man's breathing hitched. He lowered the gun an inch. That was all the hesitation I needed. I fired my taser at his center mass. 2 prongs arced through the air, connected, and his body convulsed. The revolver slipped from his grasp and clattered against the tile. He collapsed on his side, still twitching, the wheel of spent shells rotating beneath him like a rusted flower. I holstered my taser and stepped over to Jason Miller's body. He lay face down, one arm curled beneath his chest, the other splayed beside him. I flipped him onto his back. His wide eyes stared at the ceiling, glass fragments glittering in his hair. Crimson dyed the carpet and pooled around his shoulders. The cheap cotton of his polo shirt was torn. 2 ragged holes on the right side of his chest. Not mushroom-shaped entry wounds, but clean, precise holes from 3.8 caliber bullets. His breathing was shallow, labored. He was still alive. I grabbed my radio mic. "Dispatch, we need EMS immediately to 130 Crestwood. Victim is a male, 19 years old, 2 gunshot wounds to chest, conscious but unresponsive. Possible internal bleeding." My flashlight beam danced across the man on the floor, Charles Thompson. His eyelids fluttered. I dropped to one knee beside him, pressing my sidearm's muzzle to keep him from headbutting me as I handcuffed his twitching wrists behind his back. "Maplewood PD," I said into the mic clipped to his shoulder. "You are under arrest for the shooting of Jason Miller." He tried to speak, but only a low groan came out. One of the uniformed officers finally arrived, kicking open the front gate behind me. I handed off Thompson and knelt by Jason, rolling him onto his side in case he vomited. His lips were gray, eyes unfocused. "Hang on, kid," I murmured. "Help is coming." 10 minutes later, EMTs tore through the front door, dragging stretchers and defibrillators. Their presence split the dark hush into buzzing chaos, shouting, the whir of pumps, the mechanical hiss of oxygen masks. I hovered at the edge of the scene, watching them strip Jason's shirt, press gauze to his wounds, and flip him onto the stretcher. Each motion was professional, urgent, but I felt it in my bones. We were too late. As they wheeled him past me, I caught glimpses of his face, a boy's face with hopes and fears, and mornings yet to come. He didn't look back, eyes glazed. I followed the gurney down the steps, past a sobbing Emily clinging to the frame of the sliding door. The dump truck roar of the ambulance engine momentarily drowned out her cries as she sprinted to Jason's side. Inside the ambulance, the EMT performing chest compressions gave me a quick look. "He's bleeding out, Detective," she said, her voice cold with regret. I had the same knot in my throat, but I couldn't let it show. "Continue CPR," I barked. "Pump harder." For 5 minutes, we fought for his life. I watched each compression, each shot of epinephrine. I counted time by the flat lines on the monitor. But at 1:22 hours, the machine went silent. No pulse. I slipped on gloves and felt for carotid, and found nothing. I stood, the fluorescent lights inside the ambulance blurring as tears welled in my eyes. I turned away so Emily wouldn't see me. Outside, Officer Reed placed a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Laura." He wasn't just saying it, he meant it. I slipped back into the house alone, the once cozy ranch bathed in police lights. The revolver lay abandoned on the balcony floor. I picked it up, inspected the cylinder, 6 spent casings, 6 shots fired into a kid who'd been pleading for his life 15 seconds ago. I set the weapon down on the coffee table and exhaled, tasting blood and dust in my mouth. Then I pulled out my notebook and clicked record again. What started as a simple mistake became something much darker, I said, voice hoarse. "Stay with me." I pocketed the recorder, stood up, and looked out the sliding glass door at the sprinklers still running from earlier that night. Tiny beads of water caught the red and blue lights like falling tears. I knew what I'd done next would haunt me for the rest of my days. I just didn't know exactly how yet. I climbed into the back of the coroner's transport as they wheeled Jason's stretcher past me, the doors sliding shut with a pneumatic sigh. The white van sat idling, its interior bathed in that antiseptic glow you only find in hospital corridors. I leaned forward, my chest tight, and pressed a gloved palm against the cool steel wall. Outside, the night was an echo chamber of distant sirens and insect hymns. Somewhere in that darkness, Emily was still screaming. By 2:15, I was back at the precinct, the fluorescent lights practically burning my retinas as I stamped through the crime scene log, adding, "Thompson, Charles, charged with manslaughter" next to the time. My hands trembled enough that the ink smudged. I cleaned my glasses on my sleeve and forced the smear into compliance. Protocol demanded I interview every witness, collect every scrap of evidence. But all I could think of was that boy's face, half gone, his mouth agape as if still crying out. I told myself repeatedly, "This is my job, this is procedure." Yet I felt detached, as though watching someone else's life on a broken monitor. I paged through my notebook. The scribbled timeline marched on. 00:45, dispatched, 00:52, arrival, 103, shots fired, 10:22, pronouncement, 10:45, suspect in custody. Next, I needed Emily's statement. I found her in the interview room, legs tucked beneath her on a plastic chair, knees stained with grass. Her red-rimmed eyes fixed on the floor tile. A thin hoodie hung off her shoulders like a shroud. "Emily," I began softly, pulling up a second chair, my tone as gentle as I could manage. "I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me everything you remember, step by step." She lifted her head. Her face was pale, eyes luminous with fresh tears. He said he loved me," she whispered. "He thought it would be romantic. He called me earlier, said, 'Wait by the balcony.' And I thought he was kidding." Her voice cracked. "Then I heard the creak. I saw his silhouette. I saw Dad. He wasn't always like that. He used to tuck me in, read me stories. But then he lost Mom, and I guess he got worse." I nodded, pen hovering. "When you saw your dad with the gun, what did he say?" She hesitated, swallowing. "He called him an intruder. He yelled, 'Get out!' Then the first shot. Jason fell, and I screamed. I screamed so loud my throat burned. Dad didn't hesitate. He reloaded. He shot 6 more times. I tried to stop him, but he shoved me back inside." She shook her head, as if the motion could wipe away the image. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe Dad could do that. I jotted notes. The 6 more times was the key. Overkill. "Thank you," I said quietly. "One more thing. Did you see your dad's expression?" Emily's lip trembled. He looked calm, like he was finishing a job, no remorse. "Okay." I closed my notebook and covered it with both hands. "You did great. We'll get you home soon." I escorted her to the family room, where an officer offered her bottled water and a blanket. In the hallway, I paused and inhaled deeply. I could still taste the copper of Jason's blood. The scent clung to my uniform. I rubbed at the collar until sweat blurred the fabric. By 3:30, the crime lab technicians were gone. The forensics van departed under strobe lights. I walked the perimeter one last time. The shattered glass still glinted. The porch railing bore a fresh scuff. The grass, trampled into the shape of a boy's final landing, was matted and damp. I collected one of the spent casings near the balcony's edge, an empty shell marked .38 SPL, and tucked it into an evidence bag. It would join the other 5 from the second volley. Our ballistic expert would compare rifling marks later, but Charles Thompson's thumbprint was already on the trigger. When I finally cleared the scene at 4:05, dawn's first gray tinge was creeping into the east. The cicadas had fallen silent, replaced by the low hum of traffic engines starting for the morning commute. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the ghosts that clung. My partner Marcus was leaning against my cruiser, sipping cold coffee from a styrofoam cup. "You okay?" he asked, voice tight. I exhaled. "That kid didn't deserve that." Marcus nodded. "I know." He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, 10 to 8, Hayes 10 to 8. I felt my own knuckles whiten as I gripped the mic. The radio crackled. "Copy that, Detective." We drove back to the station in silence. The sunrise was a pale witness to our exhaustion. I clocked out of the night shift report without glossing over anything. Witness testimony, shell casings, suspect behavior. I added my own observations about Emily's trauma, the suspect's cold demeanor, my personal reaction. Supervisors would review it at 8 a.m. I didn't want to think about it yet. Home felt impossibly distant. My apartment was a single-bedroom unit above an old Greek diner off Main Street. The neon sign below, Gigi's Diner, open 24 hours, buzzed like a broken warning. I pushed open the door, and the smell of cinnamon rolls and stale coffee hit me all at once. I paused in the entryway, suitcase in hand, and imagined Jason's body crumpled in the gravel, a stark contrast to the sweet diner aroma. I dimmed the overhead light and flicked on the kettle. Tea, I figured, would soothe my rattled nerves. While the water boiled, I lay out my uniform across a chair, noticing for the first time the patch, a silver eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch. I touched it absently, wondering if it symbolized justice or just the crushing weight of responsibility. I poured tea into a chipped mug and dragged myself onto the couch. The TV flickered on, tuned to the morning news. A local anchor rattled off the day's weather. Expect sunshine, high of 85. I wanted to mute it, but the mundane chatter felt like a lifeline to normalcy. My phone buzzed. An alert from the department. Ballistic report pending. Suspect's bail set at $500,000. Next court date, July 18th. I exhaled and texted back a brief confirmation. Then I stared at the mug in my lap. The steam curled upward like ghostly tendrils. I brought it to my lips and sipped. The tea was weak. I could taste the tannins more than anything else. My hand shook. I set the mug on the coffee table and reached for my voice recorder. I clicked it on. Detective Hayes, personal log. It's 6:15 on July 6th. I'm home, technically. I can still feel Jason's ribs under my palm. Still hear Emily's voice begging for mercy. I know it's all in my head, but the line between memory and nightmare is blurred. I need sleep, yet I'm terrified of closing my eyes. I paused and rubbed my forehead. Tomorrow, I'll head to the DA's office. I'll testify. I'll stand in that courtroom and tell them what a scared kid he was, how he begged for his life. But tonight, I'm afraid the memory will follow me into the dark. I clicked it off. I tried lying down, but my mind spun. The image of Charles Thompson reloading, his eyes vacant. Emily's face twisted in horror. The flash of my taser, the crunch of gravel under my boots. Every sound made me jump. At 7:45, I gave up on sleep and crawled back to my desk, clearing space for my laptop. I called a detective in juvenile services whom I'd worked with before. She agreed to check on Emily's placement with a trauma counselor. Then I drafted a preliminary report for the DA, describing emotional states, procedural timing, and possible mental health evaluations for Thompson. By mid-afternoon, I was back at the precinct, but night had already crept into every crevice of my thoughts. The DA's office was a stone building downtown, looming like a tomb. I sat across from Assistant District Attorney Perez, a sharp woman with steel-rimmed glasses. She read my deposition in a single glance. You've been thorough, Hayes, but the key question will be Thompson's state of mind. Self-defense claims hinge on perceived threat. I leaned forward. He shot a kid on the ground 6 more times. My voice dropped lower than I meant. That's not perception. That's execution. Perez nodded, tapping her pen. Agreed. I'll file for aggravated manslaughter, possibly second-degree murder. We'll see how the psychiatric evaluation goes. She gave me a small, tight smile. Thank you. I left her office feeling hollow. The courtroom felt like a distant battlefield I'd soon have to face. Outside, a pigeon cooed from a windowsill. It ruffled its feathers and hopped away. I wanted to be that pigeon, insulated from human violence. Back in my cruiser, I sat unmoving, fists clenched on the steering wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled. I thought about my recorder, the one I kept for these sessions. I sometimes wondered if, years from now, I'd be able to listen to these tapes without wincing, or if I'd be too ashamed of how broken my voice sounds. I drove home in the lengthening dusk, windows down. The air smelled of cut grass and late summer blooms. A child's bicycle lay abandoned on a lawn, its chrome handlebars gleaming. I willed myself not to look at the seat. No helmet, no child. I swallowed hard and focused on the road ahead. But in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a flash of movement behind me, a shadow drifting across the back seat. I blinked, and it was gone. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine. The world outside my windshield was normal. The quiet hum of air conditioners, the glow of porch lights. I grabbed my recorder one last time. Night 2, I whispered. The ghosts won't let me rest. Tomorrow, we begin the trial prep. But right now, I'm not sure I can separate who I am from what I saw. I tucked the recorder into my coat pocket and stepped out into the night. A late breeze stirred the leaves, and somewhere, a dog barked. I exhaled into the darkness. "I'm still here," I murmured. "I'm still standing, but for how long?" And with that, I closed my eyes, waiting for sleep, waiting for the nightmares to begin. I woke to the shrill chirp of my phone at 5:30 on July 17th, 2 days before the preliminary hearing. My head throbbed with fatigue, every muscle protesting. I'd sat at my desk until sunrise drafting statements, reviewing witness logs, combing through every piece of evidence. Now, as I blinked at the soft glow of the screen, I saw a text from Ada Perez. 9 a.m. trial prep. Conference room, please be ready. I rubbed my eyes and dragged myself upright, tossing off the thin throw I dozed under. My apartment felt colder than usual, as if the air itself recoiled at my presence. By 7 a.m., I was behind the wheel of my cruiser again. The morning commute buzzed around me, commuters with coffee to go and earbuds in place, oblivious to the carnage that had stained Crestwood Drive. I passed under the diner sign. Gigi's neon glow flickered, half-heartedly inviting patrons to breakfast. I thought of Emily Thompson, now in therapy, and Jason Miller, forever silenced. I exhaled a shaky breath. At the station, I found Marcus already pacing outside the conference room. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes were bloodshot. "You okay?" he asked, a voice soft. I nodded, though inside I felt hollow. As ready as I'll ever be. Inside, Ada Perez waited with 2 attorneys from Thompson's defense team. The table was strewn with notebooks, printed ballistics reports, and an array of coffee cups, some full, some abandoned. Perez gave me a curt nod. "Detective Hayes, thanks for coming. We'll run through direct examination, cross-examination, and potential evidentiary objections. Are you good on the timeline?" I flipped open my notebook to the printed timeline I'd painstakingly compiled. Dispatch at 00:45, arrival at 00:52, first shots at 01:03, pronouncement at 01:22, suspect in custody by 01:45. The defense attorney, a lean man with a tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "Detective, we may question the exact timing. There's a 2-minute discrepancy between dispatch logs and your dash cam timestamp. Can you account for that?" I forced my voice steady. "Dispatch logging can lag by a few seconds. My dash cam is synced to GPS, which aligns closely with dispatch. The 2-minute window includes my acknowledgement delay and manual logging. I'm confident those times are accurate within a few seconds." He frowned, but moved on. "We spent 3 hours drilling potential cross-questions. Did you draw your service weapon before tasering Thompson? Why didn't you wait for backup? How did you approach the balcony?" Each time, I relived the moment, stepping onto that wooden railing, the echo of my boots, the surge of adrenaline. My palms sweat just thinking about it. Finally, Perez called it. "Good work, Laura. The jury will see you as calm, collected, and precise." I nodded, but my stomach churned. Collected and precise in the face of an execution. The thought felt wrong. Afterward, Marcus drove me back to the station to finish paperwork. I watched the suburban landscape slide by, manicured lawns, boarded-up mailboxes, children's bicycles left in driveways. It all seemed so innocuous, until you imagine a bullet hole where the wood splintered. At my locker, I changed into plain clothes. I needed to visit the scene before the trial. Photographing the balcony in daylight might reveal details we'd missed. By 1300 hours, I was back at 130 Crestwood Drive. Yellow crime scene tape had been removed, but faint outlines in the grass marked where officers had stood. The balcony railing showed a small gouge in the paint, likely from Jason's boot. I crouched and pressed my gloved finger to the splintered groove. Under afternoon sun, the edges were sharper, more jagged than I remembered. Wood fibers jutted out like splinters from a broken bone. I walked inside, careful not to disturb the still-stained carpet, now covered by a temporary mat laid by the Thompson family's cleaning crew. I snapped photos of the sliding glass door frame, glass fragments still stuck in the track. The doorknob housing had a smear of dried blood. I squeezed a cotton swab in my kit to collect a sample. These small details might prove how far Thompson leaned out when firing the second volley. Then I stepped back onto the balcony. I closed my eyes and inhaled the warm air, tasting sun-baked vinyl and the faint scent of lavender from a potted plant in the corner. I could almost hear the ghostly echo of gunfire, a distant hammering in my skull. I shivered, then exhaled and opened my eyes, focusing on the horizon. A mail carrier ambled down the street, oblivious to the remnants of tragedy beneath her feet. It felt surreal. Back in my cruiser, I drove to the county morgue. The coroner's office had kept Jason's body for an independent review at the DA's request. I needed to confirm the precise angle of entry wounds. In the sterile hallway, I found Dr. Singh, who'd conducted the autopsy. He beckoned me into the examination room. Jason's body lay on the autopsy table, covered by a sheet up to his mid-chest. Dr. Singh lifted the sheet carefully. The wounds were gruesome. 2 clean, parallel tracks angled slightly downward. He marked the entry and exit points, comparing them to diagrams. Detective, these trajectories suggest the shooter was leaning over the balcony railing, firing into a prone subject. The second set of wounds were administered within seconds of the first, based on hemorrhaging patterns. I traced the lines with my gaze. That aligns with my observation of Thompson's position. Dr. Singh nodded. It also suggests minimal hesitation. He didn't hesitate to press the trigger again and again. The words hit me like a hammer. "Yes," I whispered, "execution." I thanked him and left, my stomach twisting. By the time I returned home that evening, the sun had dipped low. I cracked the window to let in the cool air, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On my desk lay the conference room's printed photographs. The balcony, the shell casings, the autopsy diagrams. I sorted them into evidence folders, labeling each carefully. My hands finally steadied. Organization felt like armor against the chaos in my mind. At 2100 hours, I forced myself to eat. A frozen meal, lasagna, undercooked at the edges, felt like cardboard in my mouth. I drank water instead of tea. I couldn't handle any more caffeine. I flipped through the station's policy manual, rereading the section on use of force. It clearly states that once the threat is neutralized, additional shots constitute excessive force. Yet, defense would argue Thompson perceived ongoing threat. How do you prove a prone, helpless boy wasn't dangerous? I closed the manual and rubbed my temples. I slipped into bed at midnight, the roar of air conditioning humming like a distant thunder. My eyes closed, but sleep eluded me. Instead, I lay listening. The tick of my clock, the hum of streetlights, the faint thump of wind against the window pane. At 2:17, I sat up with a start. Footsteps, quiet but deliberate, paused at my door. I flicked on the lamp. The room was empty, my heart hammered. Just the house settling, I told myself. Yet the sound lingered in my ears, a reminder that even solitude could betray you. The next morning brought more interviews. I deposed the first responding officers, capturing their recollections. Thompson's demeanor, Emily's screams, the timing of the taser deployment. Each account fit the narrative, until I spoke with Officer Franklin, who hesitated when asked about the second volley. "Detective," he said, "get away," then fired again. I can't explain his calm. It was like he was methodical. I noted every word, sensing how crucial that adjective, methodical, would be in court. By mid-afternoon, I was exhausted to my bones. I stepped outside for air. The sky was a washed-out gray. A school bus crawled past on Crestwood Drive, children chattering inside, none aware of the horrors that occurred on that street. My radio crackled to life. "Detective Hayes, your presence requested in records." I clicked it off, swallowed my frustration, and headed back. In records, I found a stack of background files on Charles Thompson. His military service 20 years earlier, discharge under honorable conditions, then the death of his wife in a car accident 4 years ago. He'd struggled with depression, taken leave for counseling, then returned to a desk job. I paged through his personnel file for references to anger management. Nothing. No red flags, no previous violent incidents. Just a father who lost his wife and a teenager who died trying to surprise his girlfriend. I printed out the relevant pages. They would bolster the DA's argument that Thompson was not an active threat actor, but a grieving widower whose emotions spiraled into lethal overreaction. As I gathered the files, I felt a tightness. How easily loss can ripple into tragedy. When I finally left the station at 19:30, night had already fallen. The moon was a thin sliver above the rooftops. I climbed into my cruiser, closed the door, and locked it. As I turned the key, I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the back seat. Someone hunched over, head bowed. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door open, peered inside, empty. I steadied my breath. "It's just the shadows," I whispered. But as I drove away, I couldn't escape the feeling that somewhere, beyond the hum of the engine, a young boy's final plea still echoed. "Detective, help me." Tomorrow, I'd stand in that courtroom and tell Jason's story. But tonight, under the weight of every bullet fired and every memory etched into my mind, I wondered if words alone could ever deliver justice, or if they would only deepen the wounds left behind. I eased into bed after the long drive home, but sleep refused me. My mind replayed the day's events in looped projections. The hollow thud of the judge's gavel, the hush that fell over the gallery when I took the stand, Emily's tear-red face hovering at the prosecution's table. I stared at the ceiling as the ceiling fan rotated lazily above me, its blades casting slow-moving shadows that felt like hands reaching down. My phone vibrated twice on the nightstand, a reminder set for tomorrow's 7 a.m. briefing. I silenced it and rolled onto my side, but the mattress felt like a slab of concrete, unyielding and cold. In the darkness, I heard it again, the faint echo of gunfire, spaced exactly 19 seconds apart. 3 shots, a pause, and then 6, just like that night on Crestwood Drive. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the fan's whir. I forced my eyes shut, willing the images away, but all I could see was Jason's face, half of it missing, bone and tissue fanned across the pavement like torn paper. His eyes stared at nothingness, but in my memory they glared back at me, demanding acknowledgement. At 3:17, I gave up and sat upright. The room was still, the only light a sliver of moon through the blinds. I fumbled for my recorder on the nightstand and clicked it on. Detective Hayes, personal log. I can't sleep. The court looms tomorrow, and I feel the weight of every witness statement pressing down on me. I'm afraid of forgetting something critical, but more afraid of remembering too much, of letting the memory fracture my resolve, The silence is unbearable. I clicked it off and slid from the bed, planting my feet on the cool hardwood floor. I brewed coffee at 4 a.m., the machine's hiss and drip imprinting a dull comfort in the otherwise mute apartment. I stared into the dark liquid, adding just enough cream to dull the bitterness. I carried the mug to the living room couch and wrapped my arms around it like armor. The morning news droned quietly on the muted TV. I left it on the ambulance crash report segment, oddly fitting, while I reviewed my notes on the Thompson family dynamics. Charles Thompson's personnel file had revealed no prior violence, but his counseling records hinted at unresolved trauma after his wife's death. His downward spiral had gone unreported to his superiors. There was no mandatory protocol for civilian mental health reporting. That gap in the system now sat between me and justice. By 5:45, I was dressed in uniform and in my cruiser, heading to the precinct. The sky was still ink black, but the first hints of dawn bled at the horizon. Homestead Road was deserted except for street sweepers and the occasional stray cat slinking across the lanes. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. A tired woman with dark circles and unkempt hair tugged into a loose bun. I exhaled and tapped the mirror to steady my nerves. At 6:30, I joined Marcus in the roll call room. He handed me a styrofoam cup, and I took a grateful sip. His face was drawn. "Rough night?" he asked. "You have no idea," I muttered, flipping open my notebook to the courtroom schedule. Today's agenda: finish witness prep, review exhibits with Perez at 8 a.m., then head to the county courthouse by 9 a.m. I watched the video loop of the balcony surveillance, the grainy clip of Jason's silhouette against the doorframe, then Thompson's arm raising the revolver. The timestamp flicked by in red numerals, 01-312. I toggled the brightness until I could trace the outline of the cylinder as it rotated. At 7:45 a.m., Ada Perez met me in her office for final exhibit review. She arranged photographs, the shattered window pane, the spent casings marked C1 through C6, autopsy images showing internal hemorrhaging. "We're going to admit the photograph of the second volley as evidence of overkill," Perez said, tapping the image of shell casings splayed across the lawn. "Defense will object, but these are key. Word your description precisely." The placement and grouping of the casings indicates the suspect's deliberate, repeated use of lethal force on an already neutralized subject. "Understand?" I nodded, though my stomach churned with the weight of it. "Understood." We practiced my direct examination narrative, concise, factual, devoid of personal judgment, no editorializing, just the crime scene facts, the timing, Thompson's actions. Then we rehearsed the cross, anticipate the defense's questions about perceived threat, mental state, my own use of force options. I kept my answers firm. He was twice removed from his child's threat zone. He reloaded deliberately. He fired again despite Jason's prone posture and surrender gestures. By 9:30, we were seated in the packed courtroom. Wooden benches groaned under the weight of onlookers. Neighbors, journalists, amateur legal observers. Emily sat with a counselor at the back row, hood drawn low. Thompson was at the defense table, his face ashen, accompanied by his attorney and his aged brother, dressed in a gray suit too formal for a suburban trial. The judge, a stern woman with graying hair and wire frames, presided over the dais. She glanced down at her notes, then called the session to order. The prosecution presented opening statements, a mosaic of tragedy, loss, and breach of duty. The defense attorney followed with an appeal to fear and misunderstanding. A man defending his daughter, acting on impulse, not malice. When my moment came, I stood and stepped to the witness box. My uniform felt tight, constrictive. Every pin and badge an accusation waiting to be explained. I placed my hands on the rail and looked straight at the jury. "Detective Laura Hayes," I said, voice steady. "On July 6th, at approximately 00:52 hours, I responded to a call reporting shots fired at 130 Crestwood Drive. Upon arrival, I observed an adult male standing over a second-floor balcony, armed, and a juvenile male lying on the ground below. The male on the balcony, later identified as Charles Thompson, was pointing a revolver at the juvenile, Jason Miller, who—" I paused, swallowing hard, "who appeared incapacitated, face down, with no weapon in hand." The lead defense attorney's eyes narrowed. When I mentioned incapacitated, he reached for his objections but did not speak. The judge allowed the statement as part of my observation. I continued. "Thompson discharged his weapon twice, causing the juvenile to fall. He then reloaded his revolver and discharged all 6 remaining rounds into the juvenile's torso, despite the absence of any further threat." My mouth was dry. I could taste the faint copper tang still lingering. During cross-examination, the defense attorney's tone sharpened. "Detective Hayes, you say you observed no threat after the initial shots, but did you see Mr. Thompson reload? It was dark, wasn't it?" I tilted my head to meet his gaze. "Sir, the balcony was illuminated by the cruiser's spotlight and emergency lighting. I personally saw him withdraw the cylinder and chamber each round." He leaned forward. "Or you assumed he reloaded because, let's be honest, you didn't see the entire process. You're making an inference, detective, not a statement of fact." My pulse spiked. In his mind, the ambiguity cast doubt on my credibility. I closed my eyes for a second, inhaled, and opened them again. "Sir, I did witness each exchange of cartridges. The sound of the metal cylinder, the clicking of the rounds chambering, the muzzle flash, specific auditory and visual cues. I'm confident in what I observed." He smirked slightly, clearly displeased. "Auditory and visual cues, those are subjective, detective. You're relying on your senses, which can be impaired under stress, correct?" I gripped the rail tighter. "Under high-stress conditions, my training is to focus on sensory input. Sight, sound, touch. I have over 13 years of experience responding to gunfire incidents. My senses are the tools of my trade." The jury scribbled furiously. The judge intervened. "Counsel, let's keep this to relevant points." My heart thudded. The defense rested shortly after, having introduced seeds of doubt about perceived threat and sensory accuracy. In the late afternoon, after hours of testimony from medical examiners and expert witnesses on ballistics, the judge recessed court until tomorrow. As I stepped down, passing Thompson, I caught his gaze, unblinking, hollow. It felt like a challenge. "How can you justify what you've done?" he seemed to ask. My stomach twisted. Back in the hallway, ADA Perez intercepted me. "You did well," she said, though her eyes were grim. "Tomorrow, closing arguments at 11 o'clock. Be there." I nodded, my lips stiff. I wanted to say more, about how it felt to see that boy die under repeat fire, but I knew better than to blur the line between fact and feeling in court. That evening, I retreated to my apartment. The city lights glowed through my window, a constellation of human lives moving on. I heated leftovers for dinner, but each bite felt tasteless. I turned on my recorder. Personal log. The courtroom felt like a crucible. They tested every detail of my perception, my reaction times, my motives. I'm exhausted, not physically but emotionally. I fear tomorrow's closing will carry the weight of a jury's verdict. If they find Thompson guilty, will I feel vindicated? Or will I only feel the emptiness of a boy who cannot be brought back? I don't know. I clicked it off. I sank onto the couch, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. My phone buzzed again, an email notification. Expecting another legal update, I unlocked the screen. Instead, it was an anonymous email with no subject line. The body contained a single attachment, a photograph. I tapped to open it. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. Jason Miller, alive, standing inside a church hall, smiling broadly as he handed out cookies at a fundraiser. Behind him, a banner read, Maplewood Youth Outreach. I recognized the hall's stained glass windows. I had processed hundreds of crime scene photos but never seen this. The timestamp on the image read June 1st, 2018, 5 days before his death. Beneath the photo was a line of text in plain font. He wasn't just a kid on a balcony, he was bringing light. What else don't you see, detective? My chest tightened. Who would send this? Had someone been watching me? I stared at the photo. The warmth of his smile contrasted violently with the horror I carried in my mind. My vision blurred with tears. I mailed the attachment to Ada Perez under urgent, then sank deeper into the couch, the photograph burning itself into my thoughts. As I sat there, the hum of the refrigerator sounded like a low heartbeat. The anonymous note echoed in my mind. What else don't you see? I knew the trial tomorrow would hinge on whether the jury believed Thompson saw a threat, or if they believed Jason was nothing more than a boy who climbed for love and paid with his life. But now, with this new image, I wondered what else was hidden. Every flash of detail I thought certain seemed murky, and in that uncertainty I felt the walls closing in. Tomorrow I would stand before the judge and jury one last time. I would state the facts as I saw them. But as I turned off the lights and lay back on the couch, I realized the real question wasn't what happened on that balcony, but what I might have missed in the shadows. I drifted into a troubled half-sleep, the echo of the anonymous message reverberating in my mind. What else don't you see? And then the footsteps returned, slower this time. 3 steps on the hardwood floor beside my sofa. I bolted upright, heart hammering. But the apartment was empty. Only the photograph lay on the coffee table, face up, the boy's smile hauntingly bright under the lamp's glow. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness. I'm listening. But there was no answer, only the steady tick of the clock, counting down the hours until judgment. The courtroom was silent when I stepped up for closing arguments the next morning. The dull hum of the air conditioning ricocheted off the high ceiling, mingling with the low murmur of the gallery. I watched from the witness stand as Ada Perez spoke with measured certainty, her voice echoing off the wooden panels. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, you have heard evidence of a father's rage unleashed upon a young man who posed no threat. You have seen the trajectory of bullets, the timing of reloads, and you have heard from Detective Laura Hayes, an investigator with over a decade of experience, whose testimony revealed that Mr. Thompson fired 6 rounds into a prone, unarmed teenager. This was not self-defense, it was a conscious decision to kill. I folded my hands on the rail and squeezed lightly, feeling the polished wood press into my palms. The defense attorney rose then, his voice respectful but insistent. Members of the jury, you've seen tragedy unfold. A grieving father, fearing for his daughter's safety in the middle of the night, acted in a moment of terror. Detective Hayes did her duty, but can we truly judge a man whose world was shattered only hours before? Would any of us, faced with a perceivable danger to someone we love, react differently? He paused, spreading his hands. A universal plea. I could see jurors shift in their seats, some nodding, some frowning. I closed my eyes briefly and recalled the squeal of the taser prongs against Thompson's vest, the way his body convulsed before he reloaded, his mind as calm as if reading from a script. The memory burned bright, searing every doubt aside. I opened my eyes and looked straight at the jury. The judge gave her final instructions, and then we were sent out to deliberate. The hours stretched on, each minute an eternity. I paced the hallway outside room 3B with Marcus, the weight of my uniform feeling heavier than ever. We spoke in low tones. "You did everything right," he said between steps. "You laid out the facts. Now it's up to them." I nodded, but couldn't shake the note's final line. "What else don't you see, detective?" At 5 o'clock, the jury filed back in. The foreperson, a woman in her 50s with stern features, stood. The judge asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" The woman looked down at her notes and replied, "We have, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict form to my clerk." I held my breath as the clerk unfolded the paper and read, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Charles Thompson, guilty of manslaughter in the second degree." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the prosecution table. Perez hugged me, whispering, "Thank you." I managed a tight smile. Thompson's attorney leaned in to speak to his client, his voice calm, resigned. I saw Thompson's head tilt, his eyes flicker. For a moment I sensed remorse, but then his face hardened again, as though he'd resigned to the outcome without truly feeling it. Later, in the dim light of my cruiser, I stared at the victory that tasted hollow. Marcus glanced over. "You okay?" I exhaled slowly. I keep hearing those 6 shots, each one aimed at a boy who never posed a threat. He handed me a bottle of water. "You did what you could." The drive home that night was quiet. I parked beneath the same street lamp that had illuminated Crestwood Drive months earlier. The halo of yellow light hovered above me, and for an instant I froze, half expecting to see Emily's tear-streaked face pressed against the window. Nothing but my own reflection stared back. Inside my apartment, I found another email from an anonymous sender. Not everybody cares about justice. Some just want answers. Attached was a grainy video clip taken from a doorbell camera. A hooded figure standing on Thompson's porch at midnight, pointing a smartphone camera toward the street. The timestamp read July 15th, 2 days before trial. I watched the figure raise its arm, as if beckoning someone or something toward the camera. The image flickered, but in one frame I thought I saw a child's silhouette dart behind the figure. I rewound and froze the frame on my laptop. There it was, tiny, half hidden by the hood, the back of a boy's head, his hair a shock of dark curls. I compared it to Jason Miller's yearbook photo. The hairline matched. The night sky behind them was identical to the one I'd driven under. My breath caught. Who had set that camera? Who had stayed hidden in the shadows, filming the night before the trial? And why send it to me now? The next morning, I drove straight to Ada Perez's office. I laid the printouts on her desk. "This was recorded 2 days before closing arguments," I said. "Someone was watching Thompson's house, and someone left this for me. I don't know if they're trying to reveal the truth or warn me." Perez studied the images, her brow furrowing. "This could be evidence of a conspiracy, intimidation, or worse. We need to trace that angle, but be careful. If this goes public, it could taint the verdict." I nodded. "Understood." In the days that followed, we unearthed security footage from a neighbor's Ring camera. The hooded figure appeared again, not on Thompson's porch this time, but on Crestwood's balcony at exactly 1 a.m. and 2 seconds and 30 milliseconds, the precise moment before the first shots rang out. The figure lingered in the frame for only 2 seconds. Phone raised, then vanished. No face, no identity. Marcus and I canvassed the neighborhood for witnesses. Everyone reported only one hooded stranger, the same person we now believed had documented the lead-in to Jason's death and Thompson's rampage. But no one could identify the stranger. There were no footprints, no companions, nothing left behind but a dozen glare-filled video frames. Late one night, unable to sleep, I replayed that 2-second clip over and over. The figure's posture was almost casual, arm raised, wrist at eye level. But why document it? Were they a guardian angel of sorts, rooting out injustice? Or a darker presence preying on violence, drawn to death like a moth to flame? I closed my eyes and heard, in my memory, Emily's sobs, the echo of my taser, and beneath it all, the soft digital hum of a video recording. The file's metadata indicated it was sent from an untraceable account routed through a VPN. It was nearly impossible to track. Whoever it was had planned this carefully, sending the photo of Jason's cookie drive smile, the time-stamped clip on the balcony, and the video from Thompson's porch. 3 elements, each pointing to unseen witnesses. 3 messages, each suggesting that the story we'd told was only part of what really happened. I assembled the evidence in my living room, stacked photos, my recorder, the video clips on my laptop. I circled the photograph of Jason handing out cookies and penned a question mark at the corner. Then I sat back and stared at the image, a snapshot of innocence, moments before tragedy. What had I missed that night? What signals did I fail to pick up in the flicker of a silhouette? My recorder sat on the coffee table, blinking an orange light, its battery indicator. I pressed record with a trembling finger. Detective Hayes, personal log. The trial is over, a verdict delivered. Yet I feel justice slipping through my fingers like sand. These new images suggest there's more, something hidden in plain sight. Tonight, I'll return to 130 Crestwood Drive. I'll look for that figure, maybe find answers, or maybe just confirm that some secrets thrive in darkness. I clicked it off. I grabbed my coat and keys. As I stepped into the night, the air was cool and still. The same maple tree in the front yard cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I switched on my flashlight and moved onto the porch, half expecting someone to be watching as before. The floor was splintered wood, but otherwise undisturbed. I shone the beam across the lawn, then toward the balcony railing. Nothing. Then I heard it, the soft click of a smartphone camera shutter from somewhere above. I lifted my eyes to the second floor. A window was cracked open, its blinds parted like a slit for eavesdroppers. A phone's tiny LED flash blinked once, twice, illuminating the silhouette of someone inside, just beyond the glass. They held the device at arm's length, capturing my approach. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs. I tapped my radio. Hayes to base. Possible surveillance, 130 Crestwood Drive. Someone's inside. But my words sounded hollow in the stillness. The flash went dark. I took a step toward the door. Footsteps scuffled inside, then silence. I pressed my ear to the cracked glass. Nothing but my own ragged breathing. I reached out for the window frame, knuckles white, and prepared to pull it open when a voice echoed from just beyond the sill, soft, distant, and unmistakably a child's. "Detective, look closer." I recoiled and stumbled backward, light spilling across the porch. The words hung in the night air. No one was there. The blinds moved slightly as if pushed by an unseen hand. My flashlight flickered. I raised it to the window, but the pane was empty. In the hush, I heard once more, faint as a whisper. "What else don't you see?" I exhaled, the beam of light shaking on the railing, and realized the question wasn't just for me. It was for anyone who dared to look beyond the obvious, into the murky space where justice and vengeance collide. And now, as I stand alone beneath the porch light, I have to decide. Do I chase the shadow into the dark and risk becoming part of the story? Or do I accept that some truths remain hidden, forever just out of focus? I took one last breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped forward. Because there are still questions that need answers, and I swear I'm going to find them. I remember the moment the call came in, as if it were etched on my mind in neon red letters. My name's Officer Ramirez, badge number 2147, and that night I was 6 weeks into the graveyard shift at the Willow Creek Police Department. The station's old brick walls had a way of humming with tension after midnight, like the building itself was alive and pulsing with every dispatch. I flicked the radio mic off and glanced at the wall clock. 11:58 p.m. The digital numbers glowed in the dim light of the squad room, reminding me once again how late it was and how lonely. I slid into the driver's seat of my Crown Vic, leather creaking under me, and tapped the mic. Unit 14. Show me en route to North Pine and 5th. Disturbance. Possible assault. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Copy that, Unit 14. Backup is 2 blocks away. The reassurance of backup almost felt cruel. It meant help was close, yet every second until they arrived would stretch out like an eternity. I flicked my headlights on and rolled out into the thick desert air of Willow Creek, the only sounds the motor's low growl and the distant buzz of a lone neon market sign. Pine Street was a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the town's deserted commercial strip, where tumbleweeds sometimes skittered across the parking lot like frozen moments from a western. Tonight, though, the lot was far from empty. As I approached the flicker of that neon open sign, eerie at this hour, I saw a small crowd gathered under a sputtering street lamp. Their silhouettes flickered in and out of the light, phones raised, each face a pale mask of shock and excitement. A man in a stained hoodie knelt over another, brandishing a length of rebar like a prison shank, his back arched and tense. I killed the engine, the sudden silence making my pulse thunder. I drew my pistol in one smooth motion and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The night seemed to pulse around me. The hum of the lamp, the whine of desert wind through tumbleweeds, the soft murmur of phones capturing every second. "Police!" I called, voice echoing. "Drop the weapon." The large man froze and turned, eyes glinting in the weak light. His chest heaved, and for a moment I thought he might drop the bar. Then he grinned, a slow, predatory curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Finally," he said, and the crowd around me stifled gasps. He tapped the rebar against the asphalt, sparks flying. "I was wondering when you'd show." My grip tightened on the gun. "Sir, put it down, you're scaring everyone." He tilted his head, listening as though I'd spoken in a language only he could understand. Then he spoke again. No silent words. The words landed like a blow. No silent words. I swallowed hard, the hairs on my neck standing up. He meant voices in his head, voices I couldn't hear, but that clearly drove every move he made. He stepped away from the man on the ground, thin, shaking, hoodie soaked in sweat, and turned directly toward me. "Tell me," he said, voice calm now, almost gentle. "What do you see?" I forced myself not to flinch. "I see you holding a weapon over someone who's already terrified," I said. "I see a man who's been hurt. I see people who could get hurt." He nodded, like a professor marking my answer. "And yet you aim your weapon at me. Why?" My heart pounded. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. The street lamp wavered, and for a second I thought the light itself was breathing. "Because I have to," I said. "Because you're dangerous." Anger flickered in his pale eyes. Dangerous to whom? To me? Or to them? He gestured toward the victim, a boy no older than 20, who lay curled against the cold hood of a car, knees drawn up, face buried in his arms. The man swung the rebar in a lazy arc, the metal scraping the asphalt, bursting sparks. I took a cautious step forward. "Because if you don't put it down, I will. And no one else will get hurt." He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound, and I saw the madness in his eyes, how the neon sign's red glow reflected in the wet sheen of his forehead. He leaned in, close enough that I could see the flecks of orange in his pupils. "You really think you can save him?" he whispered. "You think you can save me?" Before I could react, he lunged, rebar swinging. The motion was so sudden, so violent, that I barely had time to raise my gun. The shot cracked like a whip. He staggered but didn't fall, rebar slicing the air. I squeezed the trigger again and again, each round echoing down the empty strip. Silence fell. The rebar clattered to the pavement. The man slumped, breathing raggedly, eyes half closed. He lay still, blood blossoming on his shirt. The boy screamed, scrambling away on shaking legs, eyes wide with terror and relief. I called it in. Shots fired, suspect down. Need EMS and coroner, possible gunshot wound. As I knelt beside the wounded man, pressed the radio mic again, I felt the weight of reality crash over me. The rebar was a blunt weapon, but each bullet tore through flesh and muscle. He screamed in pain, curses and pleads tangled together. I had done what any cop would do, but at what cost? Sirens approached in the distance, backup and EMS converging like vultures. I lay my gun on the pavement and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. He hissed through clenched teeth, but his breathing steadied. He looked at me, eyes narrowing. "No silent words," he rasped. I stayed with him until the medics arrived, until they tended his wounds and loaded him onto a gurney. He stared at me the whole time, as if trying to memorize my face. Later, back at the station, I replayed every moment. The lamp's flicker, the hum of wind, the taste of dust on my tongue. I walked past the evidence room where my report sat waiting, typed up in neat paragraphs that could never capture the fevered panic in my chest. I pressed the mic, but no words came. The memory was too loud. I went home at dawn, unable to sleep. My partner found me on the couch, uniform half off, eyes glazed. I looked at him and said, voice hollow, "We need more training." He nodded. "Yeah, we do." But in that moment, I wondered whether any training could prepare you for the silent words. Those voices that only one person hears, driving them to violence at 2 a.m. under a flickering neon sign. I wondered whether the real danger of the graveyard shift wasn't the emptiness around you, but the darkness inside someone else's mind. The hours after the shooting blurred together like a fevered dream. I remember stumbling out of the call room just before sunrise, the sky bleeding pale pink through the blinds of my squad room window. My uniform was still stained, grit from the asphalt, flecks of blood, I couldn't tell whose, so I peeled it off in the locker room and shoved it into the evidence bin. I couldn't bring myself to look at it again. My partner, Thompson, found me slumped in the briefing area, head in my hands. He didn't say a word. He never did when things got rough. Instead, he slid a styrofoam cup of black coffee across the table toward me. Steam curled up, promising warmth. I looked down at it, the surface rippling like a pond disturbed by a falling leaf, and took a long, trembling sip. "Report's waiting," he said softly. "You want to knock it out, or you need more time?" I exhaled, feeling the weight of every second. "Give me 20, I muttered, pushing myself to my feet. My legs felt like rubber, but I walked to the computer, logged in, and started typing. The words came out disjointed at first. Shots fired, suspect down, possible GSW to pole wielder. But I forced myself to keep going, to capture every detail, the flicker of the neon sign, the rebar's sparks, the suspect's whisper. No silent words, over and over in my head like a mantra. When I hit submit, my fingers ached. Thompson took the report, nodded, and left without a sound. I wanted to follow him, to retreat somewhere safe, but there was no safe place on graveyard shift. The station was already coming back to life. Units returning from calls, dispatchers yawning into their mics, the radio crackling with new emergencies, a barking dog stuck in a neighbor's attic, a two-car fender bender on Elm, a noise complaint at a trailer park. Each new call reminded me I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. I grabbed my coat and walked outside. The morning air was crisp, nearly cold enough to burn my lungs. Up on Pine Street, the lot was empty again, except for tow trucks hooking up the victim's battered car and flashing police lights reflecting off broken glass. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, watching debris of the night settle into silence. The suspect was loaded into an ambulance on a stretcher. The victim was already gone, driven off for surgery. No cameras, no crowd, just the hushed hiss of the medic's radio. I closed my eyes and tried to slow my breathing. Each inhale was a fight against the images flooding in. The rebar's arc, the echo of each shot, that final gaze when he whispered to me. I'd killed a man, someone whose mind had betrayed him, someone who may have believed he was fending off demons. I'd shot him twice in the back, and now his life lay in the hands of trauma surgeons. By the time I returned to the precinct, the fluorescent lights overhead felt too bright. I wanted to close my eyes, hide under a desk, disappear. Instead, I made my way to the squad room and sat next to the coffee pot. I poured another cup, stared at the dark liquid, and felt a sharp shame prick my gut. The lieutenant appeared, crisp uniform, badges gleaming. He slid into the chair across from me. "Ramirez," he said, voice low but firm. "You did what you had to. Call came in hot, weapon down, threat to an innocent, protocol followed." His words should have been comforting, but they fell flat. "Sir, I began, voice catching. He was in crisis. I should have de-escalated more. I should have. The words died in my throat. I felt exposed, naked in front of him, like a child caught breaking something fragile. He leaned forward. "You did your job. We'll review the footage. You'll give a statement. But you kept people safe." He patted my shoulder. "Go home, get some sleep. We've got counselors on staff if you need." I nodded, but I didn't trust my legs to carry me out. Eventually, I managed to stand, offered a stiff salute, and left the room. On the way out, the counselor's office door was closed. I bit my lip, considered knocking, but turned away. Night shift officers didn't talk about feelings. Outside, the sky was pale blue, the first traffic jets gliding overhead. I slid into my car and parked in the employee lot. I left the engine running, radio off, and stared at the dashboard clock as it ticked toward 6:15 a.m. I thought I might fall asleep right there, key in ignition, head on the steering wheel, so I closed my eyes. Instead, I was jolted awake by my phone's vibration. A text from dispatch. "Video has leaked. Public viewing. Media at scene." My chest tightened. The shooting had been recorded. Someone in the crowd had captured it. Already, online, questions were forming. Why did he die? Why did the officer shoot a mentally ill man? Where was the taser? They had no clue about the voices. the whispering commands. All they saw was an officer killing a civilian. I stood, heart pounding, and shut off the engine. I had to get ahead of this. I needed to write a press release, prepare talking points. I grabbed my coat and marched back inside. In the lieutenant's office, I found him on the phone. "Tell the PIO we're drafting a statement," he said, hanging up. "They're asking for comment by noon." I swallowed. "Sir, I want to include the mental health angle. He was experiencing psychosis, voices. I tried de-escalation. He held up a hand. Limit it to facts. Shots fired. Suspect armed with a lethal weapon. Victim at risk. Anything else is speculation. I know it's hard, but we can't put mental health in the press statement. Public sees video, not context." I felt the anger ignite in my chest. "Context matters," I shot back. "He wasn't a criminal, he was sick." "They'll see sick as dangerous," the lieutenant said quietly. "You did what you had to do." He stared at me for a moment, then turned back to his computer. "Get your statement in by 11. I'll handle the rest." I sat at the PIO's desk, opened a blank email to media@willowcreekpd.gov, and stared at the cursor blinking. Each blink was a drumbeat. Witness statements, call logs, radio transcripts. None of it captured the weight of his whisper, the racing thunder of my heart, the helplessness I felt standing in that lot. I wrote, "In the early hours of date, Unit 14 responded to a reported assault at North Pine and 5th. Upon arrival, officers encountered one individual armed with a metal pipe threatening another person's life. The acting officer discharged his service weapon, striking the armed individual twice to neutralize the threat. The unarmed individual sustained non-life-threatening injuries and was transported to hospital for treatment. The armed individual was also transported to hospital, where he later succumbed to his wounds. An internal review is underway, and all departmental procedures were followed." I hit send without reading it twice. The words felt hollow, like a ceasefire in a war I'd started myself. That afternoon, I tried to attend the debrief with the counselor. I sat in a small room, chairs arranged in a circle, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. One by one, officers spoke about how the job affected them. Rage calls, domestic disputes, suicides. When my turn came, I cleared my throat and said, "I feel broken." My voice cracked. I expected nods of sympathy, but I saw polite frowns, glances exchanged. The next officer jumped in. "Time's up for you, Ramirez," he said. "We've got roll call in 5. I left without another word, stepping back into the station corridor. Even the fluorescent lights felt judgmental. Back at my locker, I changed into civilian clothes, jeans, a hoodie I'd worn on my first day. I remember catching my reflection in the mirror, hollow eyes, skin gray as wet cement. That evening, I went home and sat at my kitchen table, staring at a stack of eviction notices, unpaid bills, a card that said "Happy Birthday" to someone I couldn't remember. I tried to eat dinner, cold pasta, rubbery chicken, but my stomach rebelled. I pushed the plate away and flicked on the local news. The anchor's voice droned through highlights. Protests outside the station, flame emojis flooding Twitter, calls for reform. I turned off the TV. Sleep refused me. I lay on the couch, replaying Pine Street over and over, the neon sign pulsing like a heartbeat, the crowd's roar, the suspect's smile, the gunshots. My mind kept whispering, no silent words. Somewhere in the pre-dawn darkness, I realized that the line between order and chaos wasn't in my uniform or my gun. It was in my head, and no amount of procedures or press releases could cleanse that midnight stain. When the sun finally broke through, I knew I had two choices: walk away or face the silent words head on. I keyed the mic on my cruiser and clicked, Unit 14 in service. And for the first time since that night, I didn't feel ready. But I drove back to work anyway, because on graveyard shift, the darkness never sleeps. And neither can I. The station's fluorescent lights felt colder the second time I walked in that night. My breath was hollow, and each footstep echoed through the empty corridors as I made my way back to the squad room. The clock on the wall read 10:03 p.m., 11 hours after the shooting. I'd barely had time to eat, and now it was time to pick up the next shift. My partner, Thompson, was already there, sorting through a stack of paperwork. He looked up, eyes bloodshot, and nodded without speaking. I dropped my gear on the desk. My radio crackled immediately. A dog barking in someone's attic, Mason Hill Drive. Nothing serious, but a chance to shake off the weight of yesterday. I stared at the call information. The address was 10 minutes away. I grabbed the keys and stepped outside into the night, the chill pressing against my jacket like a dare. Driving through Willow Creek after dark was surreal. The town seemed suspended between two realities, the safe, suburban morning commute and the unforgiving stillness of midnight. I flicked on my siren for 10 seconds, just enough to clear a slow-moving sedan, and arrived at the Hill residence to find a black Labrador snarling at the ceiling. The homeowner, trembling in sweatpants, pointed upward. "I swear he's stuck up there," she said. "He just won't come down." I set my bag on the hood and climbed a small stepladder. Above me, in the dusty attic vent, I saw the dog's silhouette. I coaxed him with soft whistles. After a few tense moments, he slithered through the opening and barked triumphantly. I lowered him into my arms. The homeowner's relief was palpable. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I handed the Labrador to her husband, who patted me on the shoulder. "Thanks, officer. You saved my dog's life." I managed a weak smile. As I climbed back into the cruiser, I felt something shift inside me. That simple call, so mundane compared to yesterday's violence, should have felt healing. Instead, my hands trembled, and I closed my eyes for a beat, trying to still the echo of gunshots. I breathed deeply and tuned the radio to the station I'd saved for nights like this, a late-night jazz program. The saxophone's low moan helped, the notes stretching into the darkness. Back at the precinct, dispatch pushed me into a new run, suspicious activity at the municipal cemetery gates. I answered without hesitation. This was my realm, quiet, methodical, anchored by routine. I parked under an iron archway heavy with ivy and stepped out into the cool night. Rows of tombstones stretched into infinity beneath a sliver of moon. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across a low hedge where a figure crouched. "Police!" I called softly. "Is everything okay here?" The figure, an elderly man in a threadbare coat, straightened. His eyes were sunken, hollow with grief. "I lost her," he whispered. "My wife. She's buried here, but I can't find her headstone." I followed him down the center path. He spoke in broken sentences about the love his wife had for lilies and how he'd promised to always bring her fresh flowers. I guided him to a marker etched with cursive I could barely read. Margaret Louise Carter, 1942 to 2021. He knelt and gently brushed away dirt from a single white lily someone had placed there earlier. He wept quietly, and I felt a pang in my chest. Empathy, fragile as glass. I stayed until he stood and nodded at me. "Thank you, officer," he said, voice steady now, "for bringing me back to her." I watched him shuffle away before turning back to my car. The cemetery gates loomed behind me, a reminder that death lived all around us, even when we thought it was safely buried. I wished I could bury yesterday's memories as easily. My radio shrieked to life again, a fight in progress at Maple and 8th, possible domestic violence. I checked the time, 11:47 p.m., and glanced at my reflection in the cruiser's rearview mirror. Pale, eyes rimmed red, jaw clenched. I tapped the siren and peeled out. When I arrived, a woman in her 30s stood on her porch, crying. Hair messy, shirt stained. A man inside pounded a closed door, shouting curses. She told me he'd been drinking, angry at the world, smashing things in their living room. I called for backup and stepped onto the porch. The door rattled. I drew my pistol again. Even after everything, it was still the most reflexive motion. The man lunged out, fists raised. My heart raced, but this time I remembered to breathe first. "Sir, step back," I said. "Put your hands where I can see them." He froze, eyes wild behind thick glasses. I kept the beam of my flashlight on his face, illuminating sweat, rage, exhaustion. "No silent words," he muttered, voice cracked. My body froze. My finger brushed the trigger guard. How many times would I hear those words tonight? They felt like a curse, binding me to every broken mind I encountered. This man wasn't the rebar guy, but the phrase was the same. I swallowed, lowered my gun. "It's okay," I said softly. "Let's talk." What followed was slow and halting. I got him to sit on the porch steps, asked him what he was angry about. He said the bills, the job loss, the fear that his wife would leave. I nodded and offered resources, shelter referrals, counseling numbers, a promise that he wouldn't go to jail if he calmed down. I didn't arrest him. Instead, I watched him sign an agreement to seek help and give her space. When he stepped back inside, his wife clutched my arm. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. I nodded and retreated to my car. For a moment, I thought maybe I could make up for yesterday, save someone broken instead of shooting them. But as I sat in the driver's seat, I realized I was chasing ghosts. The same whisper haunted me, insistently. No silent words. Back at the station, I dumped 2 more coffees into a travel mug. Thompson was at the bulletin board, pinning up missing person flyers. I stared at the laminated faces. Children lost, elders wandered away, overdose victims. Each one a life unraveling. My eyes burned. A phone rang. I answered. Dispatcher needed me to testify at the coroner's hearing tomorrow. Guilt coiled tighter in my gut. I'd have to recount every detail, my angle, my sight lines, my split-second decisions. I slumped against the counter and closed my eyes. The station felt suffocating now, every badge and nameplate a ghost of its own. I wanted to leave, to vanish into the desert night and never return. But I keyed the mic. Unit 14 in service. The words tasted like ash. There were still hours left before dawn, and the graveyard shift would demand more from me. More calls, more decisions, more silent words to decipher. That night, as I drove the empty streets, I passed the market lot on Pine Street. The faded tire tracks were still visible in the gravel. I slowed and watched the neon sign flicker. No one was there. No crowd, no officer, no suspect. Just the emptiness waiting for the next disturbance. I pressed my foot on the brake, heart pounding, and stared at the spot where everything changed. I whispered to the darkness, "What do you see?" And the wind answered with a hollow sigh, carrying a faint echo of those 3 dreadful words. No silent words. I didn't know if it was the wind or my own mind playing tricks. All I knew was that the graveyard shift wasn't over, and neither was the danger hidden in silence. The sky beyond Willow Creek's strip mall was beginning to lighten when I finally radioed Code 4 and rolled the cruiser into its stall. My body felt battered, every joint sore, my spine aching from hours hunched over the wheel. I sat for a moment with the engine running, gripping the steering wheel as if it were a lifeline. Dawn would be here in less than an hour, but I didn't feel any comfort in daylight. In fact, the thought of sunrise made everything more real. The bills unpaid, the faces begging for help, the man whose lifeblood stained that gravel lot. I killed the engine and stepped out. The cool morning breeze bit at my collar as I looked around the near-empty parking area. The neon sign for the Willow Creek Market flickered its last pulses before giving way to faint sunlight. I rubbed my eyes and imagined I could still hear whispers. Those silent words. Even with my eyes closed, my head buzzed with the echo of that command. No silent words. It had become a mantra, a curse, and an indictment of my failure to protect someone in crisis. Inside the station, I followed the stale smell of coffee to the break room. An empty thermos in the sink reminded me I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, hadn't truly paused. I grabbed a granola bar from the vending machine, tore it open, and chewed mechanically. My partner, Thompson, was prepping for the day shift briefing. His face looked drawn, but he managed a weak nod when I entered. "Rough night?" he asked without looking up. I shook my head. I don't think rough even begins to describe it. I sank into a chair. My voice cracked. I don't know how I'm supposed to keep doing this. He paused, then slid a tattered Blue Lives Matter cap across the table to me. "Wear this when you patrol," he said quietly. "Might give you some skin in the game, remind you who you are." He tapped the badge embroidered above the brim. "Cop first, everything else later." I sat with that thought as the lieutenant strode in to call the briefing. Maps were spread on the table. Missing person reports, burglary hotspots, planned checkpoints. I forced myself to focus. Grid search for the runaway teen. Extra eyes on the business district during the lunch hour. A tag team patrol near the Old Mill Road. Each assignment was a chance for redemption, or another trap for my fraying nerves. I lifted the cap, placed it on my head, feeling the stiff brim press at my forehead, the promise of belonging it carried. The first call came in 2 hours later. A possible suicidal jumper at the river bridge on Route 12. I sped toward the old arch bridge, heart heavy but senses sharpened. By the time I rounded the corner, I saw a lone figure perched on the railing, legs swinging above the dark current. She was a teenage girl, barely 17, black hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes distant. I parked the cruiser, grabbed my coat, and approached slowly, gun holstered, hands open to show I meant no harm. "Hey there," I said softly. "I'm Officer Ramirez. Mind talking for a minute?" She didn't flinch. "What's the point?" she asked, voice flat. "No one listens." I sat on the curb, leaving a good 10 feet between us. "I'm listening now," I said, "but I need you to step back from the edge first." She smiled, bitter and resigned. "You're just like them." Her gaze flicked to the water churning below. They said if I jumped, the pain would end. They said I'd be free. I felt my stomach lurch. This was different. No weapon, just desperation. I reminded myself of my training. Don't try jokes, don't tower over them, match their posture, offer choices. Slowly, I whispered, "You know what I see? I see someone who's fought through hell to get here. You've got more fights left. Help me help you find a way." Tears spilled down her face. "I'm tired." "I know," I said. "Me too." It was the truth. "But we can get through this together. I'll call someone who cares, I promise." I reached out my hand. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, head bowed, eyes closing against fear. Then she placed her hand in mine. I guided her off the railing and into my arms, holding her until she trembled less. I radioed dispatch. Jumper safe. EMS needed for evaluation. Under my uniform cap, I closed my eyes and took a steadying breath. Back at the station, I filed the report with a steady hand. Subject removed from bridge, no attempt to resist. Threat of self-harm, transported for assessment. I pressed send and exhaled. This time, I felt a flicker of purpose, an affirmation that not every call ended in blood. But solace is fragile on graveyard shift. An hour later, a violent crash at the county line. A car flipped on its roof, sparks sizzling through shattered glass. I raced up the shoulder, siren howling, lights flashing, and skidded to a stop. Flames licked at the engine block. 2 bodies lay half visible inside. A man and woman, seatbelts locked, unconscious. I sprinted forward, wrenching the driver's door open. Heat surged. Acrid smoke burned my lungs. I yanked the driver free and dragged him clear, then dashed back to the passenger side. Fire was encroaching fast. I kicked out the window, reached in and grabbed her by the arm. She slipped as I pulled, and my forearm scraped across hot metal. Pain shot up my nerve endings, but I hauled her out. We rolled away just as the engine exploded in a shower of embers. We were met by paramedics, who took over with practiced urgency. I stumbled back, coughing, adrenaline surging. My uniform was scorched, and my skin stung. I realized my heart had pounded so hard I could feel it in my temples. The radio crackled. Backup needed for traffic control. I lifted my trembling hand to key the mic, then lowered it. I didn't want to talk. Words felt useless in the face of fire. Thompson found me leaning against the cruiser, gaze distant, the neon cap fallen to the ground. He slid it back onto my head and said, "You good?" His voice was low, concerned. I looked at him and nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah," I whispered. I'm good." But I wasn't sure if I believed it, because no matter how many people you pull from the brink, bridge jumpers, car wreck victims, those silent words still echo, reminding you of the one you couldn't save, the one you ended. I finished the shift guiding traffic, closing highways, and filing yet another report that night. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon again, I had 2 more incident logs in my queue. A neighborhood dispute over barking dogs, and an elderly man refusing to leave his burning trailer due to a fear of abandonment. Each call tore at me, yet I answered them all. A soldier marching through a war zone of human frailty. As I rubbed my eyes and unloaded the cruiser for the day crew, I realized the weight I carried wasn't just my badge or my gun. It was every life I touched, every breath I saved, every silence I couldn't break. The neon sign at the market might flicker out, the rebar might rust into dust, but the echo of no silent words would never fade. My partner patted me on the back. "Grab some sleep, Ramirez," he said. "You earned it." I shook my head. "Yeah," I replied, but my voice trailed off, because I knew that as soon as the next night fell, I'd be back in that cruiser, heart hammering, listening for the whispers no one else could hear, racing toward the next desperate soul who needed me to speak loud enough so the silent words didn't consume them. The coffee in my travel mug has gone cold by the time I clock back in, but I don't notice. The station is dim, the fluorescent light still half asleep, humming like a distant generator. It's my 5th night back on the graveyard shift since the shooting, a milestone I both dread and anticipate. Every breath feels weighted, each movement slow, as if I'm wading through molasses. I flip through my holster, checking the retention snaps on my taser, my baton, my service weapon, as though inspecting them might somehow restore my confidence. My partner Thompson slides into the squad room behind me, silent as a shadow, and throws me a glance that says more than any words could. He's seen the haunted look in my eyes, the way I flinch at sudden sounds. He pours himself a cup of the worst station coffee and holds out the pot. I nod in thanks, but don't fill my mug. I don't want to feel that jolt of caffeine in my veins. It might push my heart through my throat. The radio crackles. Unit 14, roll to Pine and 5th. Reports of a loiterer near the market lot. Possible suspicious person. It's the spot where everything went wrong, where those silent words first sliced through the night. I look at Thompson and he shrugs. "You want it?" he asks quietly. "I got the next." I nod. I have to face it. I'm tired of running away from that lot, tired of pretending I could unsee what happened there. I want answers, to myself at least. Maybe walking those gravel edges again will unearth something I can't find inside my head. The drive through empty streets feels like crawling, but the neon market sign flickers into view faster than I expected, burning through the darkness with a strobing hum. I kill the engine a few yards off and step onto the gravel, the soles of my boots crunching like broken glass. The lot is bare now. No crowd, no body, no bar. The only witness is a single lamp that sputters on and off, as though uncertain whether it wants to stay alive. I pull my flashlight free and sweep the beam across the cracked pavement. I can almost hear the echo of that first shot, the metallic spit of the second, the victim's scream curling into the night. I swallow hard, taste dust in my mouth. I kneel where he fell, concrete jagged under my knees, blood long, washed away by wind and rain, but I imagine it's still there, dark and sticky. "Hello?" I whisper, voice shaking. "Officer Ramirez, anyone here?" Silence answers me, but I swear I feel a presence behind the flicker of shadows. I tighten my grip on the flashlight, fingers numb. My breath fogs the beam. I close my eyes and count to 10, focusing on the cold air in my lungs. When I open them, I see a smear of red on the gravel, fresh. My heart hammers. I kneel, reach out. It's just a smear of spilled soda someone left on their way out. I laugh at my own fear, a bitter bark that tastes like regret. Above me, the street lamp pauses mid-flicker, then steadies. Its light washes the lot in pale yellow, spotlighting every crack. My flashlight beam dances at the edges of that circle, chasing stray insects. I stand, shine the beam into the dark corners near the dumpster and behind the stacked pallets, half expecting to see someone watching. But there's nothing. Only the wind sighs, riffles, empty cardboard boxes. I step back and lean against the trunk of my cruiser, rubbing my temples. "No more silent words," I mutter to the emptiness. "Not tonight." My radio pops. "Unit 14, backup on scene. ETA 2 minutes. Thompson's voice, calm as ever. I click the mic. "Copy that." I wait, and wait. The lot seems to stretch on forever, an island in the dark, cut off from normal life. I realize that every call I take, every person I help or fail to help, brings me right back here to this same question. What do you see when nothing is there? The overhead lights of Thompson's cruiser round the corner. Headlights carve a path through the gloom. He kills the engine and steps out, closing the door with a sigh. He joins me at the edge of the lot. Neither of us speaks at first, the weight between us heavy and silent. He nods toward the lamp. "It's been a month since this place got its shine back," he says. "Funny how some scars don't heal." I follow his gaze to the lot, where the suspect fell, where I lost my naive belief in clear answers. "You still coming?" I ask, voice low. He raises an eyebrow. "We can circle the block, check it out, see if anything's changed." We drive around the block, weaving past shuttered stores and empty parking bays. On the second pass, I spot something new. Tire tracks cutting diagonally through the gravel, leading to the far corner by the chain-link fence. More recent than the old stains. Fresh. I park and step out again. The tracks are deep, like the driver skidded in. I trace them with a gloved hand, following the trail to a knot of dark shapes tucked in that far corner. A pair of huddled figures under cheap blankets, eyes reflecting my light. Two homeless men, probably looking for a place to sleep off the night. I lower my flashlight. Relief and shame roll through me. "Sorry," I say softly. "Thought this place was empty." The older of the two grunts and sits up, squinting at the light. He's clutching a travel mug, shivering. "It ain't exactly prime real estate," he rasps. I crouch so I'm at their level. "I'm Officer Ramirez. City ordinance says you can't camp here, but I don't want to push you out into the cold." He shrugs, teeth chattering. "Better than the woods. Cops come by anyway. Might as well be somewhere they know." His companion, thin, wild-haired, eyes haunted, whispers, "No silent words." My blood runs cold. My breath catches. I glance at Thompson, who's already drawing his flashlight back. I look at the man again. He's staring at me, head cocked. The phrase comes out the same, flat, chilling. I say nothing. I stand slowly, keeping my voice even. "Let me call shelter services. They've got a warm bed for tonight." The older man slides to his feet, bundling the blanket tighter. "We'll pass. It's all we know." I nod, exhaling. I snap on my taser holster and pat the empty cylinder of my gun. "All right, just be safe." They don't move. We watch each other for a beat. Then Thompson steps forward and pats the younger man's shoulder. "Better nights ahead," he says. "Promise." I climb back into the cruiser and drive off without another word, leaving the lot behind, the lamp flickering in my rearview mirror. Back at the station, the world has moved on. Dispatchers swapping stories, officers joking about coffee stains, the hum of fluorescent lights. I slide into my seat, heart still hammering. Reports to file, evidence tags to complete, calls to return. I log the homeless men outreach under welfare check, then begin typing. My fingers hover over the keys. I think of the man's whispered message, how it echoed mine. I finish the report. 2 subjects located camping in fenced lot. Provided information on shelter services. No further action taken. I hit save. The words feel sterile, nearly meaningless in light of everything. My shift ends at 7 a.m. The corridor outside is bright with daylight filtering through windows. I change in the locker room, scrub the night from my skin, and step outside into morning traffic. A new day begins for everyone, but the night's voices don't fade with sunrise. Hours later, I'm halfway through my 3rd cup of coffee when my phone buzzes. An alert from the news app. Willow Creek Market Lot, new investigation, launched after alleged police misconduct video leaks. I read the snippet. Amateur footage appears to show an officer shouting, "Drop the weapon," before firing at a suspect who may have been mentally ill. I close the article, stomach twisting. The silent words echo in my mind. No silent words. They aren't just his words anymore. They're mine too. And I realize that no matter how many people I help, no matter how many lives I save, I will always be chasing those words, trying to outpace them, to make sense of them, to understand which whispers are cries for help and which are commands to kill. I set my coffee down, hands shaking. I look at the morning sun spilling across the parking lot, at the neon sign now dark and cold, and I wonder, in the end, who really hears the silent words and who answers them? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me long after I radioed in the house clear and the suspect cuffed. The station clock read 3:42 a.m. as I eased my cruiser onto Maple Street, fog swirling around my tires like restless spirits. My breath steamed inside the cab, heartbeat steady but ears straining for any crackle on the radio. Dispatch was silent. Backup had transported Elena Morrison to Hadley Regional, and Aaron Bell was being booked without incident. Everything should have felt routine, locked down, but the house at 117 still loomed in my rearview mirror, its dark windows staring like unblinking eyes. I stepped out, flashlight in hand and sidearm holstered, adrenaline still humming beneath my skin. The front lawn was littered with broken glass and chipped siding. Footprints, Bell's and mine, had left twin trails through the dew-soaked grass. I scanned the perimeter, noting how the porch sagged at one corner, as though the house itself was breathing unevenly. A single porch light flickered, unplugged, I'd thought, casting a harsh beam that sliced through the mist and vanished into darkness. I swallowed, flexing my shoulders. Standard procedure: clear the scene, document everything, close the case. Yet the hair at the back of my neck stood on end. The door creaked as I pushed it open, again. My flashlight cut through the gloom to reveal overturned toys in the foyer. Shards of family photos scattered across the floor. The air felt colder inside, as though the walls had sucked the warmth from my bones. Every step echoed against splintered banisters. I followed the trail of Bell's footprints past the collapsed dining table and into the kitchen, where the sink still held a rusty knife, its handle stained. Coppery scent lingered. My throat tightened. I clicked off my radio. No point in alarming dispatch until I knew what I'd stumbled into. A door at the end of the hallway stood cracked, bedroom paint peeling in curling strips around the frame. I hesitated, hand on the knob, listening for breath, for movement. My pulse echoed in my ears. Inside, a single bed had been pushed against the wall, blankets ripped, mattress soaked. Graffiti was scrawled across the far wall in dripping red. Names, dates, lines crossed out. My breath caught. Dates stretching back months, locations listed. Forest Creek Road, December 4th, Old Mill Bridge, January 29th, Welcome Junction, February 11th. Every line represented a victim. The words weren't neat, they were jagged, frantic, someone cataloging terror. I trained my flashlight on the corner of the room, a shape hunched there, head bowed. "Police," I said, voice low. The figure didn't move. Carefully, I stepped forward, badge clipped to my chest. "You okay in here?" No answer. I circled around, finding a worn baseball cap on the floor, initials AB stitched inside. Blood droplets led from the bed toward the door. I swallowed hard, stomach twisting. Someone else had been here, tied up, buried in this house of horrors, and Bell had found them first. My radio sprang to life with static. "Langley, this is dispatch, ETA on your location?" I flicked it off. I didn't want their voices filling this room. Instead, I clicked my flashlight to full beam, shining it down the hallway. That was when I heard it. A soft humming, like someone whistling a lullaby in a distant room. It wasn't Elena. It wasn't Bell. The tune was warped, off-key, unsettling. I pounded down the hallway, every sense screaming, "Don't let it escape!" At the top of the stairs, the humming stopped. Darkness swallowed the beam. I rushed up, every floorboard groaning. The hallway above was narrower, windows shuttered from the inside. I pressed forward, feeling for the door at the far end. It too was ajar, light spilling through in a thin line. I flicked my torch. The room beyond was empty, save for a rocking chair, swinging slowly back and forth, paint chipped to bare wood. No breeze stirred the room. The hum started again, low and ragged. My stomach clenched. I stepped inside, sweeping the light over walls scratched with words. "He's not alone. They're here. Don't shut the door." My skin crawled. The rocking chair picked up speed as though on its own. I choked back a curse and reached out to stop it. My fingers brushed cold wood. The chair halted. Then I saw the mirror propped against the dresser. In its silver surface behind me was someone. Tall, pale, face obscured by shadow. I spun around, nobody there. My flashlight flickered. A laugh, low and ragged, drifted from the hall. I whipped back to the mirror, the figure's hand pressed against the glass. No reflection on the other side. A whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." My breath stuttered. I remembered Belle's final stare, the smile that said he'd merely been the first. Someone, or something, had been living here long before him. And now it had my scent. I ran for the stairs, boots pounding, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst. Behind me, the chair slammed against the wall. I didn't look back until I burst out the front door into the damp night air. The fog had thickened to a wall. My cruiser sat waiting, headlights dead. Panic knotted in my gut. The engine wouldn't turn over. My radio's red light blinked in the dark, silent. I fumbled it. No signal. Everything was dead. Alone in the mist, I could feel the house behind me, its dark windows watching, waiting. I reached for my phone. No bars. The walls of that place had swallowed every signal, every hope of escape. The hum whispered again, closer now, as if beneath my feet. My flashlight, gripped so tight my knuckles bled, began to dim. Something shifted in the fog. A shape emerged, limbs elongated, eyes glowing. A voice, closer than before, hissed, "Welcome home." I couldn't shake the hum in my skull as I eased the cruiser onto Maple Street. The clock on the dash glowed 3:15 a.m., its red digits throbbing like a pulse in the dark. On paper, this was routine. A possible disturbance at 117 Maple. Dispatch's uncaring phrase for "go see if someone's screwing around." But tonight, every other call had been routine. A loose dog here, an alarm there. Tonight, everything had that electric edge, like the air itself was waiting to snap. Fog curled around the streetlights in lazy spirals. I killed the engine and stepped into damp chill that pressed against my Gore-Tex jacket. My boots sank a little in the soggy grass. Maple's front lawn still soaked from yesterday's drizzle. The house ahead looked abandoned. Warped shingles, boarded windows, paint stripped in long, flaking strips. A single porch light flickered, bleeding yellow through mildewed glass. Every instinct told me to stay in the car, call backup, and circle around. But the radio had crackled out at the end of Hadley Falls Ridge, and dispatch was already marking me on scene. So I clipped my flashlight to my belt and approached. From the lawn, the house's weathered facade felt alive. Each window a black eye, each sagging board a twitching lip. I inhaled, tasting mold and rot and a faint metallic tang that made me shove a handkerchief over my mouth. Halfway up the cracked concrete path, the darkness shifted. A shape in the upstairs window, awkward and still, like a scarecrow someone had dressed from the Salvation Army. I swallowed and clicked my torch on, beam slicing through the haze. Nothing moved, no reflection, no breath on the glass, only pale void. Then the scream. It ripped from somewhere inside, raw and ragged, slamming into my chest like a sledgehammer. My heart slammed back, and adrenaline flooded my veins. I tapped my radio mic, voice flat. "Officer Langley, possible hostage or disturbance at 117 Maple, proceeding on foot." My boots crunched on broken glass as I reached the porch. The wooden steps groaned underfoot. The front door stood half open, splintered hinges whining in the stillness. I braced my shoulder and pushed. Door swung shut behind me with an echo like a gunshot. Inside, my flashlight revealed chaos. A sofa overturned, stuffing spilling like pale guts. A chandelier hung lopsided, its crystals dull. Dust motes drifted in the beam, shimmering then vanishing. I could hear my own breath, ragged and shallow. Each exhale pounded in my ears. The scream had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. I stepped in, pistol drawn, finger resting on the trigger guard. My own voice sounded alien when I spoke. "Police. Anyone here answer?" My beam swept the foyer and found footprints in the dust. Bare soles, uneven, heading toward a narrow hallway. I followed, stepping carefully around splintered floorboards, every creak a betraying announcement. The smell changed as I moved deeper, from mildewed carpet to something coppery, thick, sickly sweet, like blood left to puddle. I swallowed hard, throat dry. Halfway down the hall, a door lay open, yellowed wallpaper peeled in ribbons. Under a broken lamp, a table held an old rotary phone, handset skewed on the cradle. The coiled cord snaked off the edge to the floor, severed. I clicked off my radio, silence filling the space between me and danger. No dispatch voice telling me to wait for backup. No light-handed banter, just me, steadying my breath. I ascended the stairs one careful step at a time, each board groaning a protest. Upstairs, landing strewn with debris, torn photographs, children's toys piled in a corner like forgotten sacrifices. I could almost see the history, laughter, days of sunshine, now gone rotten. A door ahead bore deep gouges where someone had scratched at it. I slid my flashlight under the crack. Nothing but black. I pushed and entered a bedroom that reeked of damp linen and decay. The bed had been stripped. Box springs lay exposed and stained. Across the far wall, someone had scrawled in thick, bleeding strokes. Names crossed out, dates inscribed. Robin Marsh, December 4th. Carl Turner, January 29th. Linda Quinn, February 11th. Each entry looked more frantic than the last, the letters drooping as if gravity itself was pulling them down. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized that pattern. Bell's handwriting from prior files, jotted in his case notes, but here it was raw, unfiltered, alive. A low humming drifted through the open doorway behind me, like a lullaby played out of tune. My flashlight swung to the hall, beam jittering against damp walls. I swallowed and stepped back, hand slipping to the grip of my gun. The humming rose, warbling, bending notes like something metallic grinding on rust. My pulse hammered, too close to ignore. I traced the sound upstairs, each footfall resonating in my chest. The attic hatch lay ajar, steps leading up carved into warped wood. I climbed, pulse so loud I thought it might burst. Moonlight slanted through a small gable window, illuminating dust swirling in the beam. The humming was louder here, as if the walls themselves were humming. In the attic center, a rocking chair swayed slowly, though no draft stirred the air. The wood, pale birch or ash, was worn smooth by years of motion. On the floor beside it lay a tattered white doll, its glass eye cracked, stuffing spilling from torn seams. The chair moved in time with a rhythm I couldn't quite place. Heartbeat or pendulum. I cleared my throat. Elena? Aaron? Anyone? No reply. I raised the beam to a tarnished mirror propped against rough boards. Darkened glass fractured the reflection into shards. As I focused, I realized the rocking chair's backrest bore a new carving. 2 interlocking initials, EM and AB. ringed by a date fresh as yesterday's. March 15th. Tonight's date. A whisper of laughter, soft and distant, drifted from behind. My flashlight flickered. I spun toward a shadow under the rafters. A tall shape, faceless, shoulders hunched. The beam jerked across the room, catching nothing but shuttered windows and spider webs. My throat went dry. Then, in the mirror, a hand printed itself against the glass. Pale, slender, each finger tipped with dirt. The shape's reflection emerged behind me, though I saw no one in the attic. Heart thundering, I spun, but the only movement was the empty doorway, an inky rectangle beyond. A voice hissed through the walls. "You shouldn't have come back." My flashlight guttered, plunging me into gray gloom. The chair slammed forward with a crack that sounded like breaking bone. I bolted, tumbling down the attic stairs 2 at a time, splinters biting into my palms. At the landing, I skidded into a wall, light dancing off peeling paint. The humming chased me, ratcheting higher, turning into a scream of metal teeth grinding. I burst from the front door into a wall of mist. My boots sank in soggy grass. I fumbled for my radio, dead. No channel lights, no static. My cruiser's headlights were out, engine silent. The house loomed silent behind me, its windows empty sockets. My pulse thundered so loud I thought the walls would shake. I backed away slowly, flashlight beam dancing across broken siding and shattered glass. Fog soaked me cold, clinging to my uniform. I ran for the cruiser, yanking at the door, locked. I searched pockets for my keys, fumbling them out only to see footprints leading away from the car toward the shadowed woods beyond the property line. A shape detached itself from the tree line. A tall figure, limbs long and crooked, eyes glowing faint orange. Its head tilted at an impossible angle. I froze. The humming stopped, replaced by a low voice just below hearing, whispering, "Welcome home." My flashlight flickered as the shape smiled. Then it crowded the beam, melting into ink and silence. I stumbled backward, heart hammering as the figure dissolved into the mist. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died entirely, plunging me into smothering darkness. I fumbled for my radio, still dead. My breath caught in ragged gasps. The fog pressed in, thick as wool, muffling every sound except the pounding in my ears. I forced myself to move, boots sliding on slick grass as I backed away from the house. The shape hovered at the edge of the porch light, its eyes glowing faintly, watching. I forced my legs forward and sprinted to the cruiser. The driver's door handle was icy cold. My hands trembled so badly that the keys rattled as I pushed them into the lock. Finally, it gave with a click, and I yanked the door open. Inside was pitch black, the dash lights dead. I popped the hood, nothing but dead wires and corroded connections. My pulse throbbed in my temples as I slammed the hood closed and circled around, looking back at the house. In the glow of the single porch lamp, the rocking chair in the attic window swung back and forth, as if someone were gently pushing it. A low, keening wail drifted from the open front door, echoing across the lawn. I unholstered my pistol and stepped forward, training the beam of my flashlight back on the porch. Each step crunched on broken glass and twisted nails. The wail rose to a blood-chilling scream that felt like it was coming from inside my skull. I hesitated at the threshold, boots inching over the threshold once more. My training screamed at me to retreat, to get help, but something deeper, more urgent drove me onward. Inside, the foyer had changed. The sofa that had been overturned before now sat back in place, upholstery shredded, stuffing fluffed across the floor like spilled cereal. The chandelier hung straight, crystals tinkling in a breeze I couldn't feel. The phone on the table in the hall rang, shrill and sudden, like a trapped animal. I froze, flashlight shaking. I clicked off my radio again. No dispatch, no backup. Just that insistent ringing. "Hello?" I whispered, voice cracking. The ringing stopped. For a moment, perfect silence. Then a soft, rasping voice, barely above a whisper. "Officer Langley, you're late." My blood ran cold. The voice was mine. An echo of my own tone, but distorted, as if played back through a warped speaker. "Who is this?" I called, stepping back. My flashlight beam danced along the walls where new scratches had appeared. Tally marks, dozens of them, carved into the plaster. I counted 23. Then the beam hit the corner, and I nearly dropped the flashlight. There, crouched in the shadow of the staircase, sat a child's bicycle, bent and broken, the paint chipped to reveal rust. A doll lay face down on the floor, gown soaked in dark liquid. Against the wall, someone had scrawled in crimson paint, "You went back." I swallowed, throat dry, and turned to retreat. But the hall stretched impossibly long, the ceiling sagging, doors appearing where there had been none. My footsteps quickened, echoing unnaturally. The air grew frigid, each exhale trailing mist. I passed the doorway to the kitchen, where the sink now held dozens of ringing phones, their cords tangled like serpents. I heard bells clatter, though no one was dialing. They rang and rang, a cacophony of urgency. I darted through the kitchen into the hallway leading to the stairs. The door at the end creaked open by itself. No lock, no handle, just a gaping hole that led into pitch. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept forward. My flashlight barely reached the first step. As I descended, a chorus of distant whispers brushed against my ears. Faint names: Robin, Carl, Linda, Elena. Each voice softer than the last, each crying out for help. Halfway down, I caught sight of movement below. A pale hand slid along the banister, fingers twitching. My pulse soared. "Elena?" I called, voice unsteady. No answer, only a soft scrape as the hand retreated. I slammed my boot into the next step, scrambling down. The hallway at the bottom stretched impossibly farther into darkness. Ahead, a single point of light flickered, my flashlight lying face down on the warped floorboards still on. I snatched it up, flipped it, and the beam fell upon a figure pinned to the wall. Elena's face, frozen in silent scream, eyes wide, mouth agape. My heart seized, and I bolted past her, stumbling into the living room. The front door was gone. In its place, a smudged outline, as if the wall had never contained an exit. I turned, looking for another way out, but every window showed only impenetrable black. The fog outside had crept inside, swirling across the carpet. My breath came in ragged sobs. Then the room tilted. Reality fractured. The walls bled, paint oozing down in rivulets. The chandelier exploded overhead, crystals raining like shards of ice. I covered my head, screaming as the room convulsed. When the world stilled, I found myself alone in the foyer again. The door stood closed as if nothing had happened. My radio crackled to life. "Langley, are you okay? Backup is here." Dispatch's voice was calm, professional, unaware. I exhaled shakily. I'm fine," I managed, voice trembling. "I just got disoriented." I forced myself to open the door. They would see nothing out of the ordinary. The stains on the walls would wash away. The scratches fill in. The phones would be gone, the doll too. Outside, the fog had cleared, leaving only the pale glow of dawn creeping over the horizon. My cruiser idled, tailpipe smoking, engine warm. I climbed in, legs stiff. As I turned the key, the radio cut off abruptly. I looked out the window, shuddering. The house at 117 stood silent and still, its windows dark once more. I started the engine and drove away, never looking back. But every night since, I've felt the whisper of someone brushing past me in the hallway, heard a phone ring in the silence of my apartment, smelled damp rot on my pillow when I wake. I've checked the walls for scratches, but found none. The tally of names doesn't add up to my calls. The scratching starts again on the anniversary of that night, then fades. I've thought about going back one last time, to close the case for good. But sometimes, when the headlights sweep across my rearview mirror, I catch movement in the back seat. A pale face, eyes empty, mouth frozen in a plea. No matter how fast I drive, it doesn't disappear. So I ask you, if the thing that haunts me can follow me home, invisible to the world, and whisper my own voice back to me, how will you know it won't come for you next?